T-minus 30 seconds. T-minus 20 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
All right, guys, another week, another podcast. This was a last-minute decision. It was a great decision. We got Josh Adler this week. A lot of tongue on that introduction. First off, before we get rolling, US Art, guys, we always talk about it. I got to get better at this intro. I don't think I make it real enough for you guys, but every day on my feed, I'm seeing all the news stories pop up. Things where they're focusing on different states, not so much widespread. I keep on talking about it. Let's get our memberships. Let's be proud of having memberships again. I don't think enough of you motherfuckers have a membership. Yeah, let's get this rolling. We got Josh here. I'm ready to talk. Ooh, that's not it. All right, buddy.
Hey, what's going on?
You're looking good, by the way. I love the glasses. Real sharp.
Yeah, I just didn't want to be left out, to be honest, so I figured I'd join you.
That's fair. That's fair. I mean, I'll be honest. It's not just because I look good in these things. It's because people in the comments say I look like I do cocaine when they look at my bulging eyes. So now I have a complex, and I like to wear these glasses. It gives me a little more confidence.
Yeah, I feel like it definitely keeps you a little incognito, too. Maybe they won't recognize much,
yeah. And these are definitely cocaine glasses, so I might have to go with something different next time.
Yeah, it's just cocaine cowboys over at your place. We know how it goes.
All day long, buddy. All day long. But no, Josh, I do this every week. I mentioned I Facebook stalked you a little bit. I saw some baby face pictures of you holding some animals.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about your early days, what community you kind of got rolling in, and, ease me into your business.
Yeah. So, I mean, my story is kind of just like everybody else's. I was that kid with toads in his diaper. That's what I always say. Like, I just always had some kind of critter from the backyard I caught, and just kind of never really grew up. Once I hit my teenage years, like 13, 14, started getting my first jobs and, starting to make a little money. And I quickly realized that I could turn this green paper I got into animals, which was just amazing to me. And so like from a really early age, as soon as I could work, I started having animals and started with birds and then ended up with leopard geckos and just kind of, I ended up with a coatimundi and just kind of got more and more into the exotics as things went on. And then got into horses in high school and was working on a couple farms. And then after that, switched to dog training. And so I've just kind of I've been around animals and kind of all of the animals my whole life. I never really grew up. And so I think that kind of just turned into, I wanted to do this for a living and I wanted to figure out a way to make this work. And so right after high school, I got a job at a local zoo, small zoo, and I met a guy there that was a mammal importer. And so that was a seasonal job. Once I got laid off from that, I hit him up and ended up working at a mammal import facility and was keeping reptiles this entire time and kind of starting to get into the more oddball species and had been for a couple of years. And once I saw him importing mammals and kind of how that process worked, he started to teach me and a couple other reptile importers started to teach me. And I just ended up doing it on my own. And that was, early on. And now I've been running the exotic empire this is my 4th year, I think, in business. So.
Oh, do you have your own master CITES or?
No. So like basically, I mean, everything, a lot of the paperwork, and like we can get into this a little bit here and there. Most of the paperwork is done on the exporters side. I just have the import export license for the states. So it's super easy. Anybody can get it. You just go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife website and apply for it. And then every shipment you do, you'll have to apply for like your CITES shipment, your CITES paperwork and all of that. And the exporters are required to have it. So I don't do any exporting from the U.S. to anywhere else. I'll use like Reptiles Express to go to Canada, but that's still like I'm shipping within the States. So I'm only importing, which honestly keeps the paperwork pretty light as far as that stuff goes.
So when you bring some of these species in, have you been doing any hand picking for little things you want to do for your own captive bred?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of one of the perks of importing. You can go through and kind of cherry pick out what you want. And so I've always done that. And I just want to be clear too, like I started early on doing a lot of wild caught shipments. Like pretty much everything I was doing was all wild caught. And over the last year and a half or so, I've transitioned a lot into bringing in captive bred animals from Europe. And so that's kind of been my main focus lately is the European stuff. I found that the animals there are higher quality. Obviously, you're getting captive bred as opposed to wild caught, but we can get into that too. Wild caught isn't bad, and it doesn't mean the animals are in bad shape, but oftentimes. But yeah, so just I mean that's kind of how it goes. Like the as far as my collection here, I'll hand pick out stuff a lot of times from the European breeders. I'll hand pick like a lot of the colubrids to keep back for myself, and then sell off whatever is surplus.
Oh, of course. I've never really looked down at the import stuff. It's just the problem is when there's that one bad apple or that one guy in the community we know about, and he may have some stuff on his table, it just doesn't look right. It
Yep.
puts a bad taste in people's mouth about the idea of importing. But we talked a little beforehand. You take a lot of steps when you were doing that to make sure everything was healthy, and you weren't just turning and burning animals.
No, and I mean I still do the wild caught animals. I still bring in wild caught shipments. I when I started early on, I was doing a lot of them. I was I had shipments landing every month type thing, and I've slowed that down and kind of focused on a little bit more like expensive animal bracket. Not so many like of the cheaper like $100 geckos or anything like that because I'm not doing as many shows. So not being out on the road as much is kind of limiting for those $50, $100 animals. It just becomes not worth it as far as a business standpoint goes. And now at this point too, I'm also really only bringing in wild caught animals that I feel need to be brought in. You won't catch me importing a bunch of Savannah monitors or anything like that. Like we have enough of those. Like we don't need to be bringing in more of these animals, in my opinion. So I'm working more with the rare species and sort of those oddball things that haven't really been fully established in the hobby. And I think we need new bloodlines or we need more animals in the private sector. So that's sort of become my focus with the wild caught stuff and less about what's available. I'm way more selective now, I guess you could say, and that's been over like the last year and a half that transition has happened. But as far as like the steps that go into it, I talked about this a little bit on Clint's podcast last time I did it. A lot of it just comes down to kind of understanding what an animal needs and like what their basic requirements are when they come in from an import shipment. The travel time for imported animals for wild caught stuff can be 4 days in a box, at times, which obviously we try to keep it as fast as we can and as little time in transit as possible. But by the time they get boxed up, go to the airport, have a layover somewhere, get to you, get unpacked, like a lot of times that is a 72-hour, process or even longer at times. So when things get in, the big thing for me is always low stress and getting them hydrated. Obviously, like, you have to really focus on that. And I don't know how in depth you want to go with like every little detail of how we do it, but basically the first steps here are just like get them hydrated, get them drinking, and then put them away and keep the stress level as low as possible for them.
Yeah, no, of course. I think we all have our evolution in the hobby, and early on, I didn't want to breed a lot of ball pythons, but I always needed ball pythons, so I bought a lot of ball pythons.
Right.
And then eventually I bred enough ball pythons, I didn't have to worry about that. But there's been a few species over the years that I've worked directly with breeders I've really liked for consignment animals and had them on my table just because I enjoy having those animals on my table. So yeah, the whole coming up and going through the import stuff, like I talk about Amazon tree bows all the time, and I would love to get a bunch of gravid females in and just see what those babies look like and start a colony.
Yeah, we did that. We played that game. So
Good.
What's that?
Did you have some success? Anything cool pop out?
Yeah, no, you would get in, like, that was always kind of the awesome stuff. It's like, like, we'll use Amazons, for example. Like, you bring in Guyana and you'd get in 50 or 100 Amazon tree boas. And, of course, a few of those girls would be gravid and they'd pop out a bunch of babies. But yeah, we had, I actually ended up selling off the group, but I was working on red stuff. So I had a lot of red calicos and actually, like, I had a red patternless male at one point who was, solid red with black eyes and just, really odd, interesting animals that came out of there. I had some paradox stuff with the Amazons that was really cool. And I kept them for a while and bred them a couple times, and then honestly just kind of moved on. It was one of those things like I had done it and wanted to try something new, and they were taking up a bunch of space. But yeah, no, like all of that, that's what interests me. It was always getting the cool stuff and seeing what pops out. When you get a gravid animal in a shipment, you have no idea what the male look like, and you have no idea what you're gonna get. So it's exciting.
Yeah, no, and the variety that you already get with that species, between the garden phase, like I said, the reds, the yellows, the oranges, and everything in between. Yeah, like I said, it's not like I don't mind buying somebody's stock in the industry. And I will say that, my other option would be just go with the elite, go with the best of the best, get the calicos, get everything I want to look at and spend a little bit of money and have a smaller collection.
Right.
But, one of my early memories in the hobby was going into a pet store and seeing a corner display of Amazon tree boas, and every year one of the two females would have a litter, and every year I had to have a baby. I'd be in the back picking out which one I wanted, like. And sadly, honestly, that was like 2002, 2003. I don't think I've kept that species since 2005.
Really? Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah,
time. Get back into it.
I know. Well, I talk about a lot of species. I put the king rat behind me. That's another species that I've always wanted to work with. I've had a couple opportunities to get a couple, and then I go and spend all my time looking at what they're doing overseas, and now it's not good enough. I want the best of the best.
Yeah, the king rats are something I work with a lot, and I'm contemplating. I haven't decided yet, but I'm contemplating on bringing in a leucistic and some hets and seeing, getting that here in the U.S. and getting that going. So,
I think that'd be amazing. I always see certain posts on Facebook. You notice like they take a lot of them out of the wild to eat them. I've seen a lot of pictures. It's insane how many of these animals they're pulling. And there is a pretty good diversity in mutations. The larger snake, which I like, I like the large colubrid stuff, man. Even if we're talking bull snakes or coach whips, all that stuff, I want bigger colubrids in my collection.
Yeah, it's funny. You brought up like them eating them from their native range. There's actually farms for king rats where they breed them for food, and these places are insane. They literally they have just clutches of eggs sitting out on the floor, and it's just thousands and thousands of eggs. It's absolutely incredible to see the pictures of it. And they farm them like you'd farm cows, like they farm king rats, and it's very interesting. So.
I think I was listening to Joe Rogan, and he was talking to an animal guy, and I think he told a story about there was a country where they were paying the natives to kill the snakes, and then when the natives realized they could just breed the snakes and bring those babies and get paid for those babies as killed animals, they started like repopulating the area just doing it themselves, just for the revenue.
Yeah, and this is actually this is a cool segue. One of the things that I still am very big on is I hold my exporters to a really high standard. I don't accept junk, and I think that's part of the big issue. Is there's a lot of importers that are just I take the good with the bad, and the bad's just part of it. The bad animals don't have to be part of it. If you don't allow your exporters to send you crappy animals, they won't. If you just stop paying for garbage animals, they don't send you garbage. It's very simple, in that respect, in my opinion. I think a lot of importers need to learn how to put their foot down and be like, hey, no, we're not doing this anymore. This isn't fair. These are living beings, and they require a level of respect and care that you're not giving them. And so that was something that I actually was working on and still am. Is I have some guys over there that are, have some of quote unquote holdback animals where they're breeding them because they can just keep them outside. They just keep them outside in a wire cage or whatever they have set up for them, and the animals do great because it's their native range. And I was doing that a lot with the Guyana red tails. I was getting a ton of captive bred Guyana red tails because they were just keeping the gravid females, letting the babies be born, and then sending me babies, or they were breeding them on site themselves. And so that was a really cool experience too, and kind of talking to them and helping them through that, and showing them that hey, you don't have to just sell everything you have. These animals can make you a lot more money if you can care for them and breed them correctly. And being in their native range, they're pretty easy to breed. You just keep them in the backyard. So,
no, there's definitely a humane way of going about this. But, there are some circumstances, and maybe a lot of circumstances where, I've heard stories from Africa where, they got to collect an X amount of number of, let's say, fat-tail geckos. Mm-hmm. And they'll let them sit in a bucket for a month while they try to collect enough. So, like you talked about, that 4-day flight to get here, if they're in a box for a month leading up to that, you're going to get a very dehydrated animal. Like you said, not working with those guys anymore is the only way to get them to stop doing it.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you are dealing with an exporter that's you feel is mistreating your animals, call them out on it. Tell them what to do, teach them, show them what you need them to do. And I literally I've walked people through, I had an exporter in Africa that I was working on getting some chameleons from, and I walked them through, like you said, they keep them in buckets or whatever, but they just had these big bins, and I was put a lid on it. I want these branches in there. You need to spray them every day. And it sounds so silly, but a lot of times these people just really don't know. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is the animal import or export business for a lot of these countries props up entire economies. And I don't just mean it provides a life for a couple families. I mean it funds cities. It is that important. The U.S. dollar is worth a crazy amount in a lot of these places. And if these guys are able to send out one $20,000 shipment a year to somebody, that is absolutely life-changing for that whole village. And I know that sounds extreme and it sounds insane, but it's the honest to God truth. I was actually just talking to an Australian journalist. We did like a little podcast story type thing. She's writing an article on the exotic animal trade, and she went to Solomon Islands. And so she traveled there. When she came back, she called me, and that was the first thing she said. She was like, I can't believe how many people this props up. And she was like, it's amazing. Like it takes care of entire villages. And I was like, yeah, it really truly does. They are reliant on this as a business for their country, not just for themselves.
Yeah, I've heard people bring up the argument that, if you take the export of animals away from some of these communities, they're going to chop down the trees and figure out something else to do with that land to keep everybody alive, whether it's farming or anything else. And that is a very true thing.
It's 100% true. And it's one of those things like I've always said, like, if we didn't have to export any animals or we didn't need them and they were going to live a full, fulfilled, their existence wasn't going to be threatened in any way, I would love to just leave them in the wild. Like, that's obviously the most ideal for everything, but that's not the reality. I mean, anybody who wants to take a look at this, just Google Indonesia palm farms and look at that. That will put it into perspective how much damage is being done to these environments. And it's not just affecting species, it's wiping species out. And so in these places, if we can get the communities there to sustainably harvest the animals, which in a lot of, like in my experience, a lot of them are very into, like it's a lot like hunting in my experience. They don't want to just decimate a population because that removes the ability for them to make income. If they go in and they collect every, snake they can find out of this 10-mile area that they have access to, next year there's no snakes. And like, they don't want that. They want this to be a continual thing. And so I think a lot of it just comes down to working with the local governments, working with your exporters, and kind of finding a balance that plays out well, and not over exploiting or being greedy with things, and also like just being educational, like teaching your exporters what you need and how to do this better. Because a lot of these places just truthfully don't know, like they've never had anybody be like, hey, I need you to set them up this way. Like, and, I don't expect them to all have ARS racks and perfect heat and all of that, like that's not realistic for them in a lot of cases. But I do expect that the animals can at least be fed and watered. I don't think that that's too far-fetched to ask of a business partner when you're in this business. And honestly, I think it's quite frankly the absolute bare minimum. So,
yeah, I agree with that. Have you had an opportunity to go to some of these places, meet these collectors, go in the field with them?
That's actually like we're just now getting to the point where I'm going to start traveling and going and actually meeting these guys in person. It's something I've wanted to do for years, but just haven't been able to. And I think this year will be the first year that we start to get out and go experience it.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing, man. I've always had I've always wanted to go to Colombia and go to maybe like a boa farm down there and see some animals being born, because there have been some bone mutations that have come in. The Labyrinth got Jeff Ronnie's attention. I think he was the first one to get those pictures sent to him. Mm-hmm. There's been numerous other animals that have been found in the wild that have been discovered. Even I talked to John Carlson. He's got that Jumanji boa that he's working with. That came in a bag of imports.
Well, I showed you the crazy paradox one that I got in from Guyana a while ago, right?
Yeah, we were talking about that one a little bit. I thought that was really unique. Paradoxing is always fun because you were asking my opinion on it, if I thought there could be anything genetic behind it. Paradoxing is one of those things that, Kenyan Sandball Albino Project has it. I thought I've recently seen that the Albino Rosy Boa Project, there might be a paradox in that. I'd have to go back and look at some pictures, but there haven't been a lot of paradoxing in animals, I think, truly turn into a genetic project.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that boa, like when I showed you pictures, I had just gotten him in. The black is spreading on him, which I find that to be kind of interesting. It's not acting like IMG would, where it's completely blacking out the snake, but it's really coming around his eyes, and his dorsal stripe is very black. The thing that's unfortunate about him is when I got him, he just came in kind of banged up, like he had obviously been attacked by something in the wild, and he's got like a little jaw slack, like his lip kind of hangs down a little bit, and he's got some scarring on his back. But I mean, just life in the wild. But the higher black expression that comes out of him every time he sheds is really interesting to me. So I'm kind of doubtful that it's genetic, but also part of me is like, I don't know, maybe like with the color expanding and spreading, that's interesting. So
you'll have to send me a picture when we get done with this. I'd like to look at it again.
Yeah, for sure I will.
I can be kind of tough love about this kind of stuff. Maybe it's because I've seen so many ball python dinkers that haven't worked out over the years, and I was just and some of this stuff just doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, and I think sometimes you just get those one-off animals, like like you're saying, paradoxing typically isn't genetic. Like every once in a while, something incredible pops out, and it just isn't actually genetic. It's just it's an abnormality in the genes that cause some crazy color or pattern mutation that doesn't pass on. So
No, I had a bow, and I'll send you pictures when we get done with this. But I was at the Baltimore Repticon show, and this like 6-year-old kid comes over to my table, and he's got this Colombian boa, but it looks like he drew a black band all the way around it. And I was like, did you put some magic marker on that thing? And he handed it to me, and it was literally like a pied marking of black completely around. And where the dorsal pattern was, there was almost like a little bit of orange flaking to show the outline of where the pattern was.
interesting.
And I ended up getting that animal in, and Jeff Ronnie really wanted it, and we had done some work together where I was owing him, so I ended up sending it his way. I believe he ended up breeding that to a Motley, but I don't know what happened to that project after that. I don't know if he's been able to pursue it. There was the hope that it maybe could have been genetic, but when we talk about this like paradoxing, it was more like, man, I've never seen anything like that before. It'd be cool to have it, kind of thing,
Yeah, and there's a few of those too. Like we actually, I never even posted it or shared, but not too long ago, I hatched out what you could call maybe like a hypo or even potentially a leucistic Leachianus gecko. He was white, yeah, white with like I wouldn't say like black or red eyes. He had kind of like this orangish weird coloration to his eyes, and I was super stoked on it because we breed a ton of leechies here, and that animal ended up just being like a failure to thrive thing. I think something was wrong developmentally with him, but he was born fully formed and everything, but he just like never ate, never took off. And I mean, I raise hundreds of baby leechies a year here, so it's not like it was an improper care situation, but I think things like that happen too. Just weird animals. Like something just happens, in their development or in their genetics, and they come out with like a cool paradox or a cool color, and it's not always as special as we hope it would be.
Yeah, I was that a male or female in that one?
On the boa.
Oh no, on the we're talking about the lychee.
Oh yeah, that was a fresh hatchling. I don't even know what sex it was. It only lived like a couple weeks.
I got a name I'll leave out of the conversation, but it was probably about 8 years ago. I got a call from a buddy who kind of gets animals in from import, and he also gets animals just from people when they're done with them.
Mm-hmm.
He called me up and he's like, "Hey man, I got this very unique Lucianus. If you want to come by and look at it, bring some money if we can work something out." And it ended up being essentially like a white Lucianus.
Okay.
But it's that's because it's background up.
No, it's showing up. I can see it.
There you go. That's a sweet spot.
That's literally exactly what that baby looked like.
Yeah. I think inevitably, I had the animal for a little while. I sent this to my buddy Bill up in Buffalo, who does a little bit of the ractodactylus stuff. First clutch hatched out, and it didn't look like it reproduced itself. And then it ended up going to another breeder in the industry, a bigger breeder who actually had identical females to that male. And as far as I'm aware, and things could change, that was a long time ago, that was the only time they've ever seen that like light leucistic color phase in a male. It had females popped up, but that was the first boy.
Interesting. I'll send you a picture of the baby that hatched so you can see it and see like if it compares. But yeah, obviously it ended up not surviving, which is a huge bummer. But
yeah. So when I got that, it was an adult. And that picture was the picture that was sent to me before we met up to pick up the animal. So it actually came from a lady right to my buddy, and then I think right to me like 5 minutes later.
okay.
So I never got to see any smaller baby pictures of it. I feel like I've seen the ones that have been produced in the industry or people that have them. It looks like they start out pretty light. It's not like they lighten up over time.
Right.
But no, really cool animal. And, I hopefully that gentleman made some money on it, especially during the Ractodactylus run about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say, man. Like I said, I got to follow up on that project. But, really, I mean it. You really have the coolest job because you're also one of these guys that gets to come across that kind of stuff every once in a while. And honestly, like sometimes I find that more exciting than actually hatching or producing animals.
Yeah, and I think that's like part of what keeps me fascinated with it is you literally never know. You never know what's going to get offered to you. You never know what's going to be available. You never know what cool morph or cool what species or you name it. There is always something super neat, and I think working with this many species, at any given time, I keep around 100 species minimum on site. When we're really jamming in spring, it's probably closer to like 200 species. So we just have such a wide variety of animals here. It's like even even just the variety in the species themselves, regardless of morph or, you know, anything interesting genetically. I mean, you can walk in my room and I've got animals that are blue, brown, black, you know, you got every color, shape, size, lizard, snakes, frogs. And it's just, I think that is what keeps me fascinated is I'm obsessed with all of the nuances and different behaviors of each species. So being able to work with so many of them is just really, it's a dream come true, to be honest with you. It's what I've always wanted to do. And it's definitely a labor of love, but I really feel fortunate that like I get to do this every day.
No, it's really great that you met the people that you met when you did that kind of put you on the path you did in the hobby. You know, I always talk about it's the people that you meet early on that really kind of get you to where you're going to go. And you meet the wrong people. Sometimes it just doesn't work out because you got the wrong people around you. But no, like I said, I'm very jealous of what you get to do, the constant variety. You know, we brought up Mike Schultz before we got started, but like, you know, he really loves the photography thing and like, you know, being able to work for Outback, see these different animals come in, be able to take these amazing pictures of them. Like there's a rush involved in that.
For sure, yeah. And you know, just you saying like you get the right people and the wrong people. Like, don't get me wrong, I bumbled through the wrong people a lot too. I was smart enough to put my blinders on and keep my head down and do what worked for me, and only associate with the people who I felt were doing it for the right reasons and fair. Because I had my fair share of scams and screwovers and all of that, just as a lot of people do. And when they're first starting out and trying to make it a business, it's not exactly the safest business to get into. We'll put it that way.
No, I have heard stories of what it's like buying overseas, and even if we're just discussing that right now. And, you know, I've heard of times where the animals don't show up, but the check gets cashed. You know, I've heard of some conditions like, you know, it's a big risk. And, you know, that's why I kind of was asking about if you had an opportunity to meet the people you're doing business with, because, you know, sometimes meeting someone face to face kind of helps that relationship.
For sure. And honestly, like the two countries that I want to focus on now as far as wild caught animals is Indonesia and Madagascar. And so I don't think that will happen this year, but I'm planning next year to go to Indo and try to go see some of these farms and you know, shake some hands and hopefully line up an exporter that I can trust and feel confident in the quality of the animals, because I've never been able to find a solid Indonesia contact. I've been able to kind of like jump on other people's shipments and add animals and, you know, gotten stuff as soon as it arrives from Indo. And I'm fascinated by the Indonesian species. I think that's sort of where my heart lies is all the Asian stuff. And then Madagascar is the Europlatus for me. I kept and bred them for a while, and then I got out of them, and now I'm like full force back into them. I absolutely love them, and I just want to build an army of them here. So
Yeah, I remember and God, these conversations were like 15 years ago, but you know, I knew people that were getting things from Madagascar, and you know, they'd always talk about the moment one of these species gets cut off, as long as you get that last shipment in, get them looking good. A lot of times the price would quadruple, sometimes it'd be tenfolds. Because once people realize they're not coming in, like, you know, monkey tail skinks did that in the industry. You know, there was such a big flow of them; those were super cheap. And then, God, man, I remember them get up to like $1,200, maybe $1,800 for just a normal.
yeah, I actually got lucky on that one. I was one of the last shipments that they were allowed out on CITES, and yeah, like that batch of them, I think I was selling like juvenile ones for like $800 a piece, and you know, selling immediately, like selling out. Probably could have upped the price on them, but Solomon Islands is a weird one. Like they close it down and then they open it back up for the monkey tails. You know, every few years it seems like. Monkey tails have been off the list for a little while now, though, so we'll see if CITES reopens them, because that's a big that's like the most expensive animal in Solomon Islands for them to export, and so they definitely want to export them, but they're also very conservative and they don't want to damage the populations there. They're very aware of how many they have and how many they can export.
Yeah, I hate that I don't remember the gentleman's name, but I did a podcast talking monkey tail skinks, just 2 straight hours of monkey tail skinks. My buddy Alex and this other gentleman, I can't remember his name. Someone will correct me after this, but we talked about in the wild how some of these populations had multiple generations living in a single tree. Mm-hmm. And you know, I think that was all, of course, through genetic testing. I thought that was very fascinating because, you know, we have a lot of these inbreeding talks. And I think, you know, the problem with the inbreeding talk is, you know, these animals have been inbreeding in the wild for tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. It's when we start incorporating mutations and we start having problems, that's when there should be an inbreeding conversation. But I think a lot of these, as long as you keep them pure, as long as you're not trying to mix something genetic in there, I think a lot of these guys are fine for inbreeding for a few generations.
I agree 100%. Yeah, and I don't know. I can't remember the study. There was a gentleman. This is years ago, before I was even in the hobby. He did a study with just normal. I think think they were Colombian red tails, did a study with them and basically said, I'm going to breed siblings to each other for as many generations as I can until I start to see issues. I start to see birth defects. And from when I read that paper, it was 7 generations before he saw a considerable number of birth defects. And what it really came down to was like kinking, like the babies were misformed at that point. But I thought that was really interesting because, I mean, 7 generations, that's like a 20, 25 year, span of siblings growing up and breeding back together. And
I would have picked a better species like leopard geckos or something.
Yeah. I thought that too, but I think it was one of those things like that guy was just fascinated with it and he wanted to see. And so, but yeah, the inbreeding conversation, I do think when we start producing like genetic morphs, like even if we take something simple like albinism, there are elements of albinism that makes an animal a bit weaker. They are a bit more sensitive to certain things. It's just a part of it. I'm not saying they can't live a full, happy, normal life in captivity, but albino animals in the wild typically don't do too great. They either get eaten by a predator or they have issues, with sun and all of that, or their sight. Like a lot of, albinism can cause blindness a lot of times and things like that. And so when we're inbreeding already slightly weakened genes together, I can see how that would probably speed up that process and cause issues. But I mean, the simple answer to that is just outcross it. It takes one more generation to outcross it and then bring it right back. And, if you're doing, half siblings or whatever instead of full siblings to each other, I think that actually helps a lot.
Yeah, we had Nick Button on for a couple of conversations, which, by the way, very fascinating guy. I don't know if you got to listen to any of those or if you've had a chance to talk to him, but just a guy who's lived reptiles his entire life, very book smart, a college professor of reptiles, you could say. But, a lot of his viewpoints on inbreeding, even some of his viewpoints on the way certain mutations react to the animal that also changes them in a way where you start having defects. Like, when you have these color changes, the albino, we know about blindness, like you said, and, that's why the bearded dragons aren't really working out that well. That's why iguanas will not work out that well, even though they have been reproduced. So it's not like you complete that end. But, we talked about when a mutation is a change into the pattern, it changes the directionality, I believe, of all the cells as it lines up on the creation of the animal. And, we talk about the spider ball python having the deformed skull that creates that wobble.
Right.
That essentially being a pattern mutation, the way everything aligned, it created also a deformed skull with it. So, again, going back to the inbreeding thing, I think the inbreeding thing is okay with a lot of stuff. You can get away with it. 7 generations of the boa constrictor is more than most people will accomplish in this hobby in their lifetime.
Exactly, yeah. And so, I mean, and like I said, that was one guy's anecdotal paper. That who knows how accurate the 7 generations thing is. But I think about it in the wild too. If you have an area that is abundant in food, has the proper environment, is a good spot for. We'll just use snakes as an example. Like use for a snake to breed. They're going to stay in that area. They're not going to leave it because, why would they? They have everything they need right here. There's the opportunity to mate. There's shelter, food, water. It's a good spot for them. And so if you think about it, if you have a congregation of, let's say, 100 animals in this area and all of them have babies, within a few generations, they're all related in some way. And if the environment doesn't change and the population of feeders can keep up with a bigger population of snakes, there's really no reason for them to leave. And so I'm sure in the wild, if we did if we did some studies on their DNA and how many of them were related, I'm sure you'd find it a lot more than people realize because there's no point for them to leave an area that's good for them.
Yeah, I always wonder about that. When we talk range of a species, how far are these animals really traveling if they have everything they need around them in that moment? I just wouldn't think an animal in the wild would leave a resource if it has a resource.
Yeah, especially not an animal as primitive as a snake. I'm sure it happens, and I'm sure I'm sure there is an instinct in them that is go find a mate, and you might have to travel far for that. But to me, I mean, we see it. I mean, ball pythons is the perfect example. If you meet their bare requirements, if you give them a place to hide in food, they'll breed. They don't really desire anything, and so I think in the wild, if they had that, I don't foresee why they wouldn't just stay exactly where they're at.
No, and I'm sure there's a paper out there that talks about the range of a ball python, but that is one where I've wondered how far they're really going. Are they finding that little hole that just always works for them? Are they really even doing much outside of drinking some water and hoping some prey comes along? It doesn't seem like that species needs a lot of stimulant to be happy.
Right. No, I agree, and I do think there are species that need more stimulus. Even within snakes, I don't think they're all created equal as far as that goes. I think there are animals that require a lot more. Because I mean, if you put a ball python and one of my big, Ptyas carinata next to each other, that's two very, very, very different experiences as far as snakes go. And so I think you have to kind of take that into account too, when you're keeping these and breeding them. Because one of the things that like I do a lot here too, it sounds funny, but I'll take sheds from other animals. Like, if I have 10 king rats and one of them sheds, I'll throw a shed in with another animal, even if it's out of breeding season, just for like the enrichment factor. And it's incredible to watch them interact with it. Like they immediately are very interested, and it just, it kind of, I think there's an element to them that like they do need a little more stimulus than just food once a week and keep the bowl clean.
Yeah.
So,
no, when you really nerd out on this, and the people that are great at this, they start noticing little things about a species they need, and blue tongue skinks come up. I always hear people talk about the horror stories of breeding. You see people with like limbs that get broken or ripped off during breeding, tails, so forth. Man, this isn't like a pat on the back, but I know what is going on with those guys the moment I look at them. Like when I open up that female drawer during a breeding season, if she takes off or looks uncomfortable, she doesn't want a male around her. She doesn't want anything. But like, I even have females that when you open up, they kind of look up at you in a way, and they almost like wag their tail, like, "Okay, I'm into whatever's going on right now. Like, is this a male?" Or a male?
right.
When you really, I don't think there's a species that if you learn the body language, you can't be successful with.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And I think sometimes the nuances are super subtle. And I mean, I don't know, for you, you kind of, if you always only really bred ball pythons, like I know you've had one off like here and there or whatever, but ball pythons has been your main focus for your reptile keeping career. Yeah.
Fuck no, dude. No, not at all, dude. I started breeding ball pythons heavily 7 years ago when Ben passed away and I helped with his collection. Prior to that,
okay.
10 ball pythons at the most, maybe 20.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, then you probably know this. I mean, I've had things as simple as like if I have a pair of animals that won't breed, I'll just move the cage in the room. Okay. Like I'll just try it in a different spot. And I cannot tell you how many times that's actually helped. Like same exact cage, same exact substrate, bedding. I mean, like the branches are the same in it. And I just change the angle of it or move it to the other side of the room. And I swear I've had him like within a night be locked up. And I think sometimes there really is just like these little subtle environmental changes or these little nuances that animals need or want, or just that little bit of, I guess you could say, stress, that little bit of change stimulates them and gets them kind of more active. And I think that can encourage breeding a lot too.
Working with so many species, you just make a mental note of these things you discover, or you actually put this stuff down on paper?
I'm not gonna lie, man. I just keep it all in the dome, and I'm sure I forget some of it, but I really should start writing it down.
No, you're fine, man. Honestly, I joke around. These podcasts are writing things down for me sometimes because it's amazing where these conversations go. Sometimes it's a little light up above your head that you didn't really think about going into a project.
Yeah. I remember really early on. You'll probably appreciate this story. This is like an old school herper story. Really early on in my snake keeping, I was probably, I don't know, maybe 17, maybe a little older, maybe 18. I had a pair of carpet pythons, and that was on the bucket list. I wanted to breed carpet pythons. That was just for whatever reason I was obsessed, and I couldn't get them to breed. I don't know what I was doing wrong, and like they were nothing fancy, but I knew I had a pair, and I just couldn't get them to go. And I was at some local podunk show, just hanging out, and there's this older gentleman, and I was talking to him, and I was like, "Yeah, I got these carpet pythons, but they just don't breed." And he looks at me and he goes, "Take them, put them in separate pillowcases, put them in the trunk of your car, drive around the block, come back, and put them together."
Yeah. I love that. When you talked about adjusting the cage, I was going to talk about old literature, talking about putting the snake in a pillowcase, taking it for a couple rides around the block, and then putting it back in and they start breeding.
Dude, it's stupid. It works. Those snakes blocked up immediately.
Yeah, I always say, it's very unique how people think about this kind of stuff because, the other thing I bring up is the people washing their pinky mice with Dawn dish soap before feeding into a picky corn snake.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, just eliminate all that smell. And I do understand it's not really something used to in the wild, but yeah, man, here's the thing. Some of that old school stuff sounds crazy, but it worked back then. We just kind of refined it over the years. We got away from the crazy shit.
No, 100%. Yeah. And I think as the hobby advances, we're going to get further away from like the crazy shit. But there is an element of like sometimes these little old school tricks work. And I think what that comes down to, though, like, driving around the block type thing. I think that just comes down to adding a little bit of stress to the animal's life. Not enough stress to freak them out where they don't want to do anything, but just enough of a shakeup that kind of stimulates them into being like, oh shit, like maybe everything's not so perfect. Like I need to reproduce and keep the species going. I think there is an element of that instinct in them. And so I think just, if you can hit, like, I guess, the right amount of stress in that way, and stress is kind of a harsh term for it, but if you can hit the right amount of change, that will definitely get them going. And I've done it several times and it does work. So,
well, I can't guarantee their intelligence, but maybe kidnapping them in a pillowcase, driving around the block, they're just happy to be alive.
yeah, maybe that's what it is. They're like, man, what a relief. Yeah.
Yeah. Right to breeding, gotta do it. Last chance. But no, yeah, dude, I love, and I wish I knew who came up with some of this old school stuff, because those are the guys I want to talk to. And Rich Eiley came up in conversation. Do you know who that guy is?
No.
He's an old school boa guy. You know the salmon boa?
Oh yeah.
He started the salmon boa line from an animal that was in his pet store. It was an adult female, came in, he sold it. I think it maybe even came back a second time, and then whoever one of those owners were that got it from his pet store bred it, and half the babies came out just salmon color hypos, absolutely beautiful. And I think the next year they did it again, and then he ended up buying all the animals back. But he did a not a DVD, he did a VHS with Tracy Barker, where he talked about completely changing the layout of his cage leading into the breeding season. And like, at different points of her being gravid, he would add one cement mixing tub on this side, one on that side. Then he'd add like some pink insulation foam around all the little nooks. And then he put 2 6-quart containers in the middle. And every single year, his female would prop up on the 2 big tubs, and it would have the babies in the crack every single time. So going into this breeding season, because I've always done a lot of rack breeding with boa constrictors, first thing I did is I put a 32-quart bin in there with cypress, and the females leading into having their babies would spend a lot of time buried in the cypress over the heat. When it was time for their babies, they were getting out, and they pushed the tub off the wall a little bit, and they put the babies between the wall and the tub. When I went to Tinley, I had 3 litters that could drop that weekend. Fortunately, only one of the 3 dropped, and everything was fine. It happened, I think, earlier in the day, Sunday. But I put the hide boxes in with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is, and I got some pictures I'll send you, the one female, when I got home from the trip, she was moving around, and then I saw her put her tail underneath pretty much the hide box and left it there. And I was like, this bitch is going to have her babies. I walked away. I came back. Big pile of babies under the hide box and a little in front. And my second female, I think she was like 3 nights ago, same thing. I went in there, I saw she had positioned her tail underneath, and I was like, we're hanging out for a while. We're going to get some babies. Came back about an hour and a half later, look, big pile of babies underneath there. So the way he put it is, these animals don't want to have their babies in the parking lot, and giving them something will make them not hold on to them longer than they need to. But I'm going to add hide boxes to the next like 4 or 5 females coming up. I'm curious if it is going to be one of those 100% things.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like it would be. I mean, it makes sense. It makes complete logical sense for them to instinctually want to lay their babies somewhere that isn't going to be out in the open for a predator to just come crawling by and see. So I would be floored if they don't use that.
Colubrids is a good example of that, and I'm sure you can attest. If you don't give them somewhere to lay their eggs, a lot of the females lay them in the water dish.
Yeah,
I don't know if you've ever had that happen.
Yeah, and like that's something I've been kind of trying to work out. Because early on when I was breeding colubrids, I did have that happen quite a bit. And it wasn't just like, oh, only my king rats do it or only my corn snakes do it. It was like, it was species across the board from several different continents. And like, I kept I just kept having that happen. Or they would lay them like where they got like half the clutch in there and half of the clutch out of the water bowl, and they're all like cockeyed on there. Like it was sloppy. It wasn't good. And I was losing eggs because of it. Cause I mean, obviously like if they lay them in the water dish, you don't have very long before they're toast. And so, when you're managing a big collection, like it's hard to know exactly lay dates for everything and whatever else. But I've just been kind of playing like kind of just what you're talking about, just like the hide box situation. Multiple lay boxes has been something I've always done since I started getting into the breeding more. And I've found that a lot of the females for my colubrids will actually pick the hide box on the cooler side of the enclosure. Like they don't want to lay them on the heat typically, which I find kind of interesting. And so I'll put like a hide box on the heat, and then I'll put a hide box on the cool side, and then I'll have just like their hide normally. So their cage is very cluttered when they're gravid. And I've definitely noticed that the cool side hide box gets used quite a bit. And I've never had any problems with the eggs like getting too cold, even if they sit in there overnight or whatever. One night at 72 degrees or 74 degrees isn't going to hurt the eggs. And so I think there's a lot of things like that snake keeping has become very easy, right? Like we can buy this rack and put these animals in there and we can have success. It's not exactly, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of things to it, but we have very good access to information now, and we have a lot of really great caging and supplies and heat, and we can set nighttime drops on things, and we can do it all kind of like from our phones even now. And I think a lot of people kind of overlook, like, what is the animal actually looking for? What do they want? Just because they will breed, or just because they did have babies, like, doesn't necessarily mean that they did it in the way that they naturally would, or how, like, in the best way possible. And so, yeah, the high box thing for boas is interesting, though. It makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah, and like you said, I give them 3 options: cool side, middle, and hot side. Now, again, when I did the larger tub in there, it was already on the hot side, but they really just liked the gap, and they were actually having their babies on the heat. But usually animals will avoid the heat when they're having their babies. But I think that was the only spot where they could find a spot they felt comfortable, so they did it anyways. But yeah, when I give them options away from the heat, they always take advantage of it. Blue tongue skinks, the same thing. Like if I were to be out of town, I know I got live babies coming. I'll typically throw some hide boxes because some of these mothers can be a little bit of an asshole when these babies are born, and some will take a chomp on them for no reason whatsoever. But with boas, like when I came home from the litter over the weekend, all the babies were actually covered on top of mom. All chilling out, all in the hot spot actually. And another cool thing about that female I saw with babies the other day was when she had her babies, her whole body was sprawled out, her tail was under the hide box. Watched her have a couple. I was like, I don't want her to stop. I closed the drawer, walked away. When I came back, her tail was still under her, and then she had went and she got her head underneath the hide box, and she was staring at the babies underneath the hide box. When I saw her like that, I was like, she's probably done pushing everything out. Let's go ahead and look at them. But no, like I said, people that don't pay attention to cycles in the wild, especially on difficult species, shouldn't be surprised they're not successful with them. Just simply paying a little attention about the environment some of these species come with that are a little difficult, you can learn a lot in just a couple chapters.
100%. I think too, one of the things I think this is something that the hobby could really improve on is you'll see a lot of times, and like I'm guilty of it too. Like, you come up to my table at a show and you're like, oh, where are those from? And the answer is Indonesia. Well, like, Indonesia is a pretty big place, and there is a ton of different environments there. And so I think a lot of times you'll see, especially like newer keepers, will be like, oh, they're from Indonesia, where it's just hot and humid all the time. Well, like, are they are they from the mountains? It might not be as hot. Are they from where exactly are you talking? Like, are you talking about an animal that's high up in the canopy where there's a lot of airflow and the humidity's lower? Or are you talking about an animal that's fossorial and living in damp dirt all the time? Like, just because Indonesia as a whole is kind of a really terrible thing to base your husbandry on. It's a big place, and there's a lot of variables that go into that. So I think getting more specific with our localities and more specific with like kind of the exact conditions these animals are living in within their native range or the country that they're from is super important, and I think that plays a big factor into breeding some of the more difficult species to breed as well.
I agree with that. I remember like Reptile magazine would like do cover art of, let's say, what was it, cave geckos. And I was like, whenever I saw, and this was back before Facebook was super relevant, when I saw an issue come out where that was the cover, I was like, man, that species is going to get hot. People are going to want this species. Here it is on the cover. You said you kind of focused on going after certain things that maybe most people aren't really going after, or things you think would be, relevant in the hobby, I guess is the way of putting it. What are some species that you've been kind of working on lately that isn't like selling yourself short by saying it could be the next thing in your life?
Oh, geez. Yeah, I think for me too, I never really focused on like what the next moneymaker was going to be, or like what the next big hobby thing was, because I realized that I was never going to catch up. It's like a lot of people are like, oh, do you work with this or that? And like, we'll use ball pythons as an example. Like, if I wanted to get into ball pythons right now, sure, I could buy in, I could spend the money, I could get the higher end stuff, and I could give it an honest shot. But the reality is like everybody else is 10 years ahead of me on this, or 20 years ahead of me on this in their collections. And I don't have the desire to go after that. I've never been into the morph game very much. But for me, what it always was is my interest was in these really unique species. And as I kind of got into them more, I kept getting kind of like shitty imports. Like, I kept getting low quality animals. And so I got good at establishing them. And then once they were established, I was like, well, let's try to breed them. We have the opportunity to do it. Let's do it. So I think for me right now, like, my focus is really on colubrids. That's where my heart lies. And so I'm working with a lot of boiga, specifically the Malaysian mangroves. That's something that I'm trying to expand a bit. Run into some snags with them, bred them several times, but they're I haven't unlocked everything with them. I keep hitting like little speed bumps with them, and I'm having some success, but not the success I want. There's a lot of European rat snakes, like a lot of the Elafe genus is kind of what I'm focused on right now. King rats, the Urartica, the Uritarian rats, ladder rats, that type of stuff. That's kind of been my jam lately. But I'm crazy with it. Like, it comes in cycles. Like, I keep things, I breed them for a couple of years, and then I move them on to the next thing, because that's what I've loved about this hobby for so long, is just the variety of species. And with the business I have and my business model, I'm able to do that. And it works out. I can kind of keep a flow of like new stuff for me to play with, kind of on standby at all times.
So I want to talk mangroves, but one last thing on what we were just saying. When I say the next big thing, that's such a broad term, and we always think ball pythons. I think sometimes when I think the next thing, it's wow, this animal's not very difficult to take care of. Wow, it's easy to handle. The breeding process seems to go well. I'm successful with birth. Like, something that you're like, wow, I could see this becoming readily available, just because there's a lack of the species in the country now. But if you put it in the right people's hands, they'll be successful. That's like,
the species, I think, and like this is something that not a lot of people are working with, and a lot of people probably don't even know about it, is the Dion's rat snake, or the steppe rat snake. Okay. There are some localities and morphs of popping up of those where they're a small snake, they breed easily, they eat great. Max size on them is only like 2.5 feet, 3 feet. They're small, super easy to breed, eat great, and man, like, some of these things are fire orange, or I mean, they're super amazing. And I'm seeing a lot of really cool work being done with those in Europe. There's melanistics out there now and stuff like that. And so I think that could be a little niche in the colubrid market. First person to come up with a morph blue beauty is going to be a millionaire for sure. I think that would be awesome. But
are they collected in the wild much, or is that a species that we have?
The blue beauties?
Yeah,
they're still collected in the wild. A couple people are still doing Vietnam. I've never brought in wild caught ones. I've never really felt the need. There's enough of them getting bred here that it's kind of like, what's the point, But well, they're still being collected.
With talking about them being collected, because you made a comment how there's just no mutations with that species.
Yeah.
Why are there no mutations in your eyes? It's from a lack of collecting? Is it just one of these things that just doesn't happen?
I think this is totally just my opinion. I have no facts to base this on, but I think for me that the Vietnamese blue beauties specifically are a very active species. They're active hunters. And so I think probably what would be happening is, like, if there was an albino born or hatched, it's not going to live very long, because it's going to go out hunting and it's going to stick out like a sore thumb in the jungle, and something's going to eat it. And I know that that's true for any species, and yet we still get albinos of certain things. But the blue beauties in specific are super active. They're going into caves to hunt bats as adults and things like that. Like, they're very, very all-terrain. They swim, they climb. They're all over the place. And I just think they don't make it. I just think they stick out like a sore thumb if they're out there and they get picked off.
I like that thought process there. Mangroves, buddy. So we've had our mangroves together in a. Oh man. I bet you that cage is 4 feet wide by 3 feet tall by 3 feet deep. Cork bark, different levels. Mm-hmm. We go through the cooling process every year. Just the room. We kept them in the bedroom. And the bedroom would cool down in the wintertime. We see some action. Nothing ever comes out of them. And we're a few years of them living together communally. During the move, we didn't move their cage over. We put them in rack systems for the move, because we had seen some people that were very successful breeding in racks. Tell me a little bit about stuff, trial and error you've had with that species.
You have the Malaysians, right? The Melanota?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So I've only ever bred the Melanota. I've never bred Indonesian, so this will only apply for the Melanota in my experience. So honestly, like, I do it a lot differently than I think most people try. I really don't temperature cycle them much at all. I food cycle them, food in a rainy season. So I've actually been able to double clutch them too. they're one of those species that is selective in their mates, though. You have to make sure you've got the right male with the right female. I've had females that won't breed with specific males. I've had males that won't breed, show no interest in certain females, but love other ones. And I don't really know I think that's one of the hiccups I'm hitting is I'm not having a super consistent season with them every year. You know, I'm kind of like on and off. Like I have some girls that breed great, and I have some that I really struggle with. But basically what I'm doing is I'm keeping them all year. I'm doing they're in 4x2x2s when they're by themselves. A couple branches to climb in, several hiding places, and then I'm doing basking side on them is like 85, 84. It's not super hot, but it's still decent. And then I'm spraying the cage down like once a week, and just keeping them fed. Kind of maintenance feeding them, and then come springtime, like end of winter, right about now actually, I will start just hammering the food into them because one of the things that you run into with this species is cannibalism. They will eat each other. I've had it happen, and it absolutely sucks because you end up losing both because they're big animals.
Yeah.
And so I will just start food cycling. I'm feeding like twice a week right now, getting the girls fattened up. The males I'll just keep on once a week. Typically over winter I'm feeding like every other week for them, every 10 days, kind of like you would any other adult snake. And I will feed a variety between chicks and rats. I don't feed them specifically just rodents. They eat a lot of birds in the wild, so that's what I try to do here. And so I will get them up to weight where I like them. I keep the girls pretty fat, and then I'll spray that cage down every day for about a week, just kind of make it almost swampy in there. Like the humidity is really high. And then I actually pair them up. I've had the best success pairing them up in a completely new cage, like a neutral environment. And so then I'll move them to a 4x2x2 that's just empty, fresh substrate cleaned out or whatever. And I keep that setup super basic, just like hide, like one branch in a water bowl. I don't give them much to do at all because I originally was doing bigger enclosures with lots of hiding places and cork and things like that. But what I found is these snakes would just go to the opposite sides of the cages, and they didn't really seem to interact with each other much. They would just kind of hang out and, not really engage with each other. And so when I dumbed it down to a more simple setup, they were kind of forced to interact with each other because they were sharing a hide box, and that was when I started seeing a lot of breeding. And so that's really how I'm doing those. And I just had a pair last season, maybe the season before. I bred them. I produced 4 clutches out of them. They were great. Paired them up, and the female attacked the male and tried to eat him. He was bigger than her and ended up eating her, and then he ended up dying. And so it's like those are snakes that have been breeding for 3 years for me. And I did the same process every time. It's nothing new, and just for whatever reason, this time went south. And like that's super heartbreaking and frustrating with this species. It's tough because they are tricky, and I haven't unlocked all the keys yet.
That's interesting. The cannibalism thing, I'll be honest, I haven't really put much thought into that while we've kept them here.
Mm-hmm.
Bree has always really liked all the boiga species, all that kind of stuff. We have a few odd and ends laying around. Haven't really, again, been successful breeding, but also really haven't tried breeding a lot. Love looking at them, love having them set up. I definitely got to get that big cage operational, but we never noticed anything on the cannibalistic side of them living together for 3 years, personally.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean that pair was a pair I had bred. I think I had 4 clutches out of them before that happened, and so it's super random. It didn't really seem I didn't do anything different, so I don't know what spurred it. But yeah, like when I found him, the male had bite marks all over his head, where you could tell where she had tried to eat him first, and he ended up getting the best of her. But I mean, it sucks. Like he ended up killing her, and then as he tries to eat her, they're both he's 7 feet, she's 6.5 feet. It's not like they're not little animals, and ended up both losing both of them, and that was a big bummer because they were my kind of like my pride and joy. They were very impressive, and I had raised them from little guys, so it sucked. But
I'm sorry about that. I think that's just part of the hobby. Sometimes I've had a couple species that it just seems like if there's gonna be something that goes wrong, it's gonna go wrong with that one species, and every time I try to consider getting back in, like the dumbest thing will go wrong, like the most nonsensical thing. I would say blood pythons, man. Blood python short tails, like Matt Minatola.
I know that name.
Philly Herpetological,
Okay.
Philadelphia guy. I used to buy some of his striped animals. A lot of his Borneo stuff. Just always loved it. I had a few really awesome animals. I went out of town one weekend. Person I was seeing at the time rolled the rack off the wall to find her gecko that dropped, put it back, pulled the probe out, and those are the animal plastics that had the heat down both sides, and murdered them. Now, here's the crazy thing about that. That was when I was out of town for a trip, and the day before I left town, I took my male red rum VPIT positive I paid $5,000 for, and I happened to put him in a different CB70 rack. Most of my accomplishments and some of the better things I've been able to do in this hobby the last 10, 15 years were on the back of that one animal and some of the founding stock I made from that. If that animal was in that rack, it would have put me in a very different place in this hobby.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a coincidence, whatever you want to call it, fate, whatever it was. Yeah, but it is weird. I mean, like I've had those type of situations too, where like, you know, you just get lucky every once in a while, and you know, you definitely get unlucky quite a bit in this too. It's part of the reality of it, especially the way, you know, we do things with the imports and stuff. But yeah, you know, like every once in a while, like I've gotten lucky and just gotten into species right at the right time and had success with it, and you know, been able to really capitalize on breeding or just having them in stock at that time. And other times, you know, I get things that I think are going to be great and do really well, and you get nothing from it. It just kind of, it really seems like luck of the draw. I mean, you can definitely educate yourself and have an understanding of what you're doing, but at the end of the day, I think this business does have some luck involved in it.
No, there's definitely some luck, and you know, like you said, I've been on the wrong side of luck so often that, you know, I guess I just deserved that one time with that animal.
Yeah.
You know, even like you know, my first litter ever, I had like 3 of those like 5-foot vision cages, like those beautiful gray cages, and I think I bought them for nothing, to be honest with you. And I had like a double head sunglow, and then like I think it was like 3 double head sunglows, to be honest with you. And I bred the one to a het blood because back then I was okay with the pos sets. I was thinking the long game. And then I bred a visual albino I got from Tom Burke to the other. Well, the Tom Burke albino bred the fuck out of this female hard. The other one didn't want to touch the female. So for like one night, I put the albino in with that one, try to get the male all riled up, get the het blood breeding, and nothing happened. Shut down my breeding season, and I continue feeding. I was using corrugated cardboard back then as a base. And I go in there, and that one female that had that one male in for one night, there was a sunglow boa sitting on top of the cardboard. And I clicked it over, and there was just a whole litter. That was my first litter of boas I ever produced. So first off, if I never moved that male over that night, I may never have got the litter. And the most insane thing about that is with all the boa experience I've had over the years, there's been so much courtship involved in my pairings. Nothing should ever happen in one night. So like that was another one of those like blessings, but got lucky, buddy. Like honestly, very lucky on that one.
Yeah, no, it happens like that too. One thing you just said that I think is good to kind of highlight is you said the long game. I was playing the long game.
Yeah. This
business is founded on the long game, and I will stand by that ultimately. I mean, I feel like this year, this is my 4th year as like a legitimate business, and I sold for about 6 months before I actually like made an LLC and named it and stuff like that. So about 4.5 years of doing this, and I think this year has been the first year where I've been like, holy smokes, like this is like something's coming of this. Like this is starting to take hold. I feel like the network has been more solid. The breeders have all, like the suppliers have been better. The animals have been better. We've been breeding more here. This is the first year where I'm like, maybe this is going to pay off. Maybe this is starting to work. And, you know, I've sacrificed my entire life to this for 4.5 years. And I feel lucky that it happened this fast. So I think a lot of people get discouraged when they're 2 years in and they're not making a world's first or going to a Tinley with 5 booths and killing it. But I don't think people understand how long this stuff really takes and how much trial and error goes into it and how much knowledge you have to learn. And the only way to learn it is from doing it. You know, you can have people guide you and you can have people show you, but the reality is like what you were talking about earlier, like the blue tongue skinks. Like you open a rack now and you can smell that they're ready or like that they're not ready. You know, you can just tell those things. That only comes from years of experience, and whether it be just that species or a multitude of reptiles, you're only able to do that because you've been doing it a long time. And so I think that's one thing that I always preach to people is if you want to do this and you want to get into this as a business, be ready to take some years of gut checks, but stay with it. Don't quit on it because you never know when that lucky break is going to happen. You're going to have that moment where you're like, holy shit, I did it. Like I bred those boas or like that popped out and that's amazing. You know, it's very rewarding when that finally happens to you.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I'll say too is about what you're saying is not everybody's cut out for this. You, my friend, were perfect for what you wanted because you accomplished it. You knew you were going to accomplish it. It may have went, we all have our bad days, but no, you're one of the tables I talked about that, like, when I'm at a show, I know you're going to have something cool. I'm always going to want to glance at it. I don't want to stare too long and, like, make you think I'm going to buy from you. I mean well, buddy, but it's been a while since I bought a reptile.
No, you can stare all you want, man. Never hurt my feelings.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I won't even touch the deli cups, man. I won't even take a picture. But, I've always, even, like, the king rats, man. And, king rats are one of those species that, the Zirkles have done very well with that species over the years. I don't need that species to be super relevant, but it is a species that I believe should be more relevant because it's such a beautiful animal.
Yeah, and I think it's going to. I think I think you're going to see a lot more of that stuff popping up, as the morphs expand and things like that. I mean, I've got some really cool, really high black expression animals here that I think I'm going to start kind of working that way and try to make one that's as dark as possible, and just that type of thing. So like, there's going to be some line breeding you're going to see that will produce a different looking king rat. But I also think the Europeans, especially, man, they're crushing it with the morphs over there right now. They are popping out so much cool stuff. The onogenic change with them, like obviously they look a lot different as adults than they do as babies. Does add an element of time with it because you have to give them the time to develop into the colors and the morph that you're going to get. The axanthics, quite frankly, look super normal until they're about a year old, and then you start to see a subtle change, and then as an adult they're a gray and black snake. And so that's an element of those that kind of, I think, delays people's gratification with them because you don't just pop out an anery looking animal, or an axanthic looking animal. You have to wait a couple of years before you get that look. But they are definitely taking a firmer hold. And I just got pictures of a leucistic not too long ago, like I was talking about, and man, like, so cool.
Yeah, I follow a couple of pages on Facebook, and I click on enough of the images. It's always on my feed at this point. Like, it's hard in my algorithm.
Yeah.
But no, I want to say there's got to be, give or take, 10 mutations I see floating around out there. I didn't know about the aneries. It's anery, not axanthic with those guys, right?
They call them axanthic, yeah.
Okay, axanthic. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't know about the color change of the axanthics. I didn't know it took a full year to know what you have.
Yeah, like even as they begin their onogenic change from that kind of brown baby look into that black and yellow, as they develop, like they tend to look black and yellow at the start, and then as they age, they gray out. And so as an adult, it looks like what you would think of like an axanthic animal would look. It's got that gray, like that slate gunmetal gray look with the black pattern on top of it. And but yeah, like that's a morph that if you didn't know what you were looking at, or you didn't know you were sitting on it, and you're gonna wait and be able to. It's going to take a little while before you can kind of show off the actual look of that animal.
Yeah, it's it's hard marketing something that doesn't come out looking a certain way. We have a group of female pastels or female pieds or female pastel hepides that turn jet black. They start out very normal. They're neon yellow. You don't think anything of it, and then they have a shed where they look a little grayer, and then eventually they just go black. Really unique looking animals, but it never happens. They're like 600 to 1,000 grams. I think 99% of them have all been females. So I didn't know if it was maybe a hormonal change or something like that. And we've had customers that we've sold animals to, and after having them for a few months, be like, hey, what's going on with my animal? And they're taking this complete transition to a black or gray looking animal, axanthic type animal. If I had a male where I could breed them together, I might be a little fascinated holding back every baby for a year to know they're all going to change. Yeah. But when you produce a project, you got to wait a whole year to know if you can even sell it as what you think it is. Really hard to market something like that.
Yeah, 100%. It's just like, you get a new morphin, but you just get a bunch of hets. It's like you're not really marketing anything at that point. You're just marketing a bunch of normal animals that maybe will turn, produce something cool. But one thing I did want to ask you, and yeah, I don't know how much you want to dive into your business here, so feel free to not answer.
No,
with you guys, like you're doing a lot of the ball python stuff. Where do you find the market is? And I know the market's still strong. I think that's nonsense when everybody's like, "Oh, the market's dead." I think the market's still there. But with like your price point. Because like I know for me personally, like the super low end animals, like the very cheap stuff, has never been worth it to me as far as a business standpoint goes.
Yep.
And then you get into the super high end animals where like you're looking for a very specific customer that's willing to spend $12,000-$15,000 on an animal. So my sweet spot has always been like that $300 to $600 range for animals. And I was curious what the ball python market was looking like as far as that, because typically the ball pythons, the kind of the sweet spot's a little bit higher than the rest of the species.
So, sweet spot. So here's the way I'll put it. I think it's a lot easier to get someone to spend $5,000 to $10,000 on a nice ball python than it is to spend $1,000 to $5,000.
Okay.
It's that $1,000 to $5,000. People are starting to realize how fast it comes down from there. There is something a little. I don't mind buying into that. Not so much me, but I know a lot of people that will buy into a higher end project. And a lot of people, if run properly, managed properly, make all their money back. We have seen projects over the years that have dropped down. I like $1,000 clutch. If I can take 6 babies, make $1,000, the way I had it set up, especially when we were a larger scale, less feeding, bigger meals. And the bigger meals I was paying like nothing for. So I was buying 4,000 to 5,000 large rats at a time, frozen, for $1 a piece.
Okay,
And
yeah,
I was doing 1 meal per every 3 to 4 weeks with the female, with even a time of the year where there might be a little bit of a fasting. Now, most females would have about 9 meals a year. And if 7 of those meals cost me $1, and then maybe I buy some small rats for those first couple meals after they give birth, I think I had it worked out that I think the energy and time that went into that animal was costing about $58 a year. And I think I was doing about the same thing on blue tongue skink, about $58 a year to maintain the animal, heat, electric, everything you can imagine. So if I'm only putting $58 into that ball python, it'd be nice if I was making $10,000 profit on that 58. But if I can make $900 on that one section of the building, I can justify having X amount of them. So that's my standard. But in my opinion, I know people working a 40 to 80 animal collection that are breaking into the 6 figures every year. And they're doing it because they are staying ahead of projects. They're buying the nicer stuff. And they're not letting themselves fall behind in the game, I guess is the way of putting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So yeah, I mean, it's honestly not as far off of how I look at it as I thought. Like my business model is 100% different than any other breeders. Somebody that's breeding exclusively, because I'm buying a lot of the animals, establishing and selling. So I have the overhead of the actual initial purchase of the animal, which I mean, obviously you know as well. But so my business model has to be a bit different that way. But I try to look at it as like sections of like is the work to profit ratio worth it on these, because like on certain things it is and on certain things it isn't. Like there are certain animals that I might, if a retail value on it is $400, I might pay $300 for it if I know it's going to sell as soon as I list it. Whereas like an animal that is going to sit around for a lot longer, I'm obviously going to pay less because I know I'm going to be sitting on it and putting that time and those meals and that effort into them. So, but yeah, interesting. Like $1,000 a clutch is honestly, quite frankly, kind of where we try to stay. If you get, that $300 to $500 range in animals seems to be what moves well for us as far as we get a lot of people too, like even what you were talking about, how you're like, oh, well, you have a lot of species that I really like and I just like to look at and, would like to one day have. Like a lot of my customers aren't buying animals for me to add to their breeding projects. Like don't get me wrong, like a lot of them are, but a lot of them are getting their first animals for a breeding project. Like they're getting their first pair of knobtail geckos or their first trio of king rats or whatever. They're buying, like they're just getting into a project, and that's kind of where I found myself being a sweet spot. Is like I can hook you guys up with really nice, high quality animals that will start you into a new path or a new species. And I think that's sort of how I've marketed it, and that's gone well for me because people are always looking to expand into new species at times, and I've kind of become like a guy that you can go to for that. So
and here's the thing, like ball pythons come with all this baggage in the community. People love them, people hate them. People understand the value. Some people just think they're worthless and they just crash. I like how stable ball pythons are, and in the past, like leucistics, bananas, pieds, Like those are animals on your table. If you buy them at the right price, you're always gonna be able to sell them.
For sure.
Now, certain, let's say, clown combos, I might not want to take a risk on. But there are what I consider the bread and butter. And, I've had some of these conversations recently where everybody is chasing the next investment ball python. I feel even the small collections are striving to make a $10,000 animal, which there's a lot of different ways you can do that now in the hobby, even with old traits.
Yeah.
But there's so many people that don't get to experience some of the cool old, let's say, calico mutations we used to make, that there's a real lack in the industry because we're all chasing recessives. We're not putting the time into some of these really unique codons anymore. I still think there is a place in that market for those animals, but I also think that place is more the pet market. And I do think the pet market is willing to spend, like you said, $200 to $500 on a very nice pet.
Yeah, and that's something I've seen change more in the last few years. Even you're seeing people who are maybe even first-time reptile owners, not even looking for a new species, but somebody who's brand new that's willing to spend $400 or $500 on that pet. And I think a lot of that gets chalked up to social media. Like there's a lot of social media has made animal keeping cool and caring for your animal cool, which I think is absolutely fantastic for our industry. You see, I always joke, you can go on TikTok and you can find some 12-year-old girl who has a white tree frog in a 4 foot by 4 foot by 8 foot tall vivarium in her bedroom that's got a waterfall and trees growing in it. And I just think that's so cool to see, because I think when I first got into this, and I haven't been in the game very long, obviously, but when I first got into it as a kid, it wasn't like that. There wasn't that access. And now, I always use the example, but frogs are a good example because they're delicate. But you can go on Josh's Frogs and you can be like, I want Amazon milk frogs, and there is a Amazon milk frog kit that you can press order, and it comes with instructions, and you can set them up perfectly and be successful. And I think that has unlocked a huge potential for growth in our hobby. And I think we're going to see an expansion in our hobby because of that. The things that you need to care for these animals appropriately are becoming more accessible, and honestly, there's just more of it. There's more technology, more knowledge now.
I was talking to Darian about his cages, the cage prices. The fact that he provides a product where somebody can put this little frog in a 4-foot cage and they're not breaking the bank, which is amazing. I love those cages, honestly. The ones you have behind them, I got a bunch over in the yard. I'm thinking about planting and creating bioactives and letting them grow it all summer, and then in the wintertime. But man, those things are heavy. They crack. They were expensive.
Yeah, they're a pain in the butt, man.
Yes, man. They're cool. Don't get me wrong. I got a bunch of them, and at the end of the year, I'm gonna have a lot of really cool different bioactives with them. But no, you can't always predict the evolution of the hobby. But who would have thought pill bugs would be selling for $600 a piece because they had a couple of horns sticking out of their head?
Insane, right? Insane.
And it literally, and I joke around, but it's such a flex in the hobby to say that I just spent $600 on this thing that's going to eat my snake shit.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, and the rubber duckies, great name. Honestly, I don't know if they sell as well as they do if they're not called rubber duckies.
No, and I think there's a lot of that too, and I think you're seeing, it's something that I definitely need a lot of improvement on, but you're seeing a lot of people being able to market their animals a bit better than we have in the past too, just kind of appealing to the pet market and the internet. If you can take a cute video of your gecko eating a dubia roach, it gains a lot of traction, and traction leads to sales. Whether we like to admit it or not, that's how it works.
Bearded dragon with a little tie on in front of a plate with waiting for his roach to hit it. I don't know if you saw those videos, but I put that video. Yeah.
Yep, but I mean I think that's sort of where you see. I think that's where you see our hobby going, though. Is that. Quite honestly, that's how people get into it. Because I think about if I had been 13. If I was 13 now, because when I first got in, it was the pet store. You went to the pet store and they had some leopard geckos and a tokay and a boa and a 10-gallon tank, and you were like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And you kind of had to be hit with that passion by yourself. You had to have that passion right away. But I think you're seeing a lot of people now that can spend an hour on Facebook or TikTok looking at cute animal videos and be like, what, maybe a bearded dragon would be cool. And then they Google, how do I take care of a bearded dragon? And here's a whole cage set up, everything you need for $400. And they're like, well, I could do that. And and I think you're seeing that happen a bit, because I've been getting, I don't know, you probably don't deal with it as much as you're, more specific, being in the morph game. But I mean, I know you sell some pet oriented animals
You
too.
have
But
to sugarcoat it, buddy. I'm a real piece of shit. I'm like a used car salesman. It's
no,
fine.
you're not a piece of shit at all, bro. You're one of the few that I actually like talking to. So
Appreciate
no,
that.
yeah,
That's
but
what
like
used car salesman.
but you're seeing like I get that on Morph Market a lot. Is like, I'm can you help me with some care tips here? Like this is my first time reptile or whatever. And like sometimes they're inquiring on species that I'm like, hey, you don't want to do this. Like this isn't a good move. But like just this last week I had the Nephrurus cinctus, the banded knobtail geckos. Something unique but not super hard to take care of. And this girl messaged me and she's like, I'm just obsessed with these. I really want them. I've been looking at them online, like how do they compare to a leopard gecko? Because like these don't come up as a beginner species. And I'm like, no, this can work for you. And like here, and like, you help them through it. And she bought it. And it's like, I think you're seeing a lot more people getting into it than other people realize. Like the hobby seems to think that we've kind of hit this like stagnation point, but I don't see it that way. I think Morph Market has really changed our game for starters. Like that site is incredible for our hobby. And I think that we're going to see growth in the next 5 years here.
No, I think the exposure for Morph Market helps out a lot, and I didn't realize how broad their reach was until I found out how many actual users they had on there. But I remember as soon as Morph Market was purchased, all of a sudden my YouTube commercials had Morph Market on it. All of a sudden, my Google feed, I'd go click on a news story, I go down, there'd be a Morph Market thing there. Now, I understand these algorithms are set up a certain way, but like that wasn't there before that. So I do think the exposure and kind of jumping back, and then we can jump back on that Morph Market dick a little bit, but you remember the early videos of Belichick opening up that drawer with that like 15-foot retic in it and it's touching every side?
Yeah.
So, if you look at the evolution of what his guidance in the hobby was, it ended with the Reptarium, these large enclosures, these bioactives, this filtration and water systems. Like he went all in with it. And where you talk about somebody buying, we'll say a dumpy frog and putting in a 4-foot enclosure, I do think that snake discovery, Emily, and I do think that Brian making that different change in the hobby he did is the reason why you see more of that and less arguing why I can keep my animal in a smaller container.
Yeah, and I think that's great because I think here with me doing the imports, most of my setups are very simplistic. Like, I mean, you see the ones behind me, like they're just branches and some mulch. Like they're nothing crazy with some hides and, leaves and whatever for like the geckos and lizards and stuff. But I don't do anything too crazy, but there's a reason for that here, right? Like I'm establishing these animals. I need to be able to keep a very close eye on them. That's how I've been able to be successful in establishing and keeping them healthy early on. And I think for the average person, that's honestly less appealing. Like I like what is cooler to a pet person? Like, oh, I have this snake in a drawer that I can pull out and show you, or I can show you this bioactive thing I built with all of these plants and like this whole environment that my snake interacts with, and the snake is more active and it's more engaging. And like I think it's becoming very I think our industry is becoming a bit more pet centered, which I think is the only way for it to grow, because if you don't get your first pet reptile, how are you ever going to get into it as like a serious hobby and a breeding standpoint? Because I think there was a quick phase there that's starting to fade. And honestly, it was kind of even when I first started doing this as a business, everybody was going to be a breeder. Everybody who bought animals was like, I'm going to breed, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to breed. And that was sort of like right at the tail end of COVID when everyone had their stimulus checks and had some money to spend and thought it was a good idea to invest it in reptiles, which was obviously great for guys like me and you. But I think the reality is that, like you said, some people have it, some people don't. Like there was a lot of people that got faded out of that very quickly because they realized it's not just, throwing two snakes together and making money hand over fist. That's not how it works.
And across the board on a lot of species, like there was a big price jump on everything during COVID. Like if you bought your Woolma before COVID, it was $150. If you bought it during COVID, it was $800. So some people kind of came in and saw certain drops afterwards. But I'll be honest, a lot of those more like random species, I guess, that are mainstream, they've really held their value high. Like I think they were very underappreciated for a long time. And even with the Woolmas, like I didn't produce a lot last year, but I've never really seen a collection talk about line breeding different phases of Woolmas. And my 3 holdbacks this past year are completely different from each other in every possible way. And I want to pursue that because I honestly think that is a species that with good line breeding, we could have a lot of really unique animals to look at in like 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, and I think that's smart of you. I think looking at a species and not just doing it like, oh, like Woma pythons are all just Woma pythons. Like there is a lot of different, variability and polygenic traits and stuff with those that I think would be beneficial to breed. And I think, like we were just talking about the long game, you know, guys like you or guys like me that are thinking ahead like that and trying to, you know, build something that's going to last years, not just be the flash in the pan, what makes me the $100 right now, is what kind of furthers those projects that way. So I definitely think it's worth doing. And I think you're right. COVID jumped the prices and a lot of it held. I mean, a lot of it didn't, but a lot of it did.
If you had them, it helped. If
Yep.
you were going to buy into them, man, that sucked.
Yeah,
That's like one of my big things too, man. Like, you know, I haven't done a lot of spending the last 5 years.
Mhm.
And it's so much harder to look at my Dumelo boas that are an arm and a leg now and all this other little things I've always wanted. That again, I mean, I'm very happy for the people that stuck it out with species that were only just kind of getting by, and now they're actually really profiting from these animals. And I know these people would work with these species no matter what, but like, you know, even Ray Gerge in the skink community was a good example of that. You know, when Brian Barczyk started talking about the skinks after coming back from Joe Ball's place in Australia, I mean, everybody in the community wanted them. Japan was buying a lot of them. Like, there was this rush for skinks, and a guy that I knew that did them for years and was just happy working with them after putting in, I think it was almost 23, 25 years, man, did he have a couple of really great years. And very well deserved, in all honesty.
But also, like, well earned, right?
Yeah.
You know, you did it when it wasn't cool, and you got really good at it, and now it's cool. So make your money, dude. Like, that's awesome for you. You know, good for you. Like, that's getting paid for your work. You know.
Do you think it takes a social media influencer to bring a new species on in a way where we'll use the word mainstream, even though we don't really mean mainstream, but can it naturally happen anymore in the hobby just when people go to the shows, or does it really need somebody in TikTok or YouTube like pushing a species?
I really just think that it won't happen without, like, I don't think it will happen organically without social media, because I think when somebody gets into a species, I mean, like, we're all living in social media world, whether we like to admit it or not. And so I think when we get animals we're excited about or that we want to work with, we post them and we share them. And so it might not take, you know, like a snake discovery or Barczyk or, you know, when he was doing it and like that type of stuff. Like, it might not take somebody like that, but I do think there's an element of it does take some exposure. And the internet, I mean, where else are you going to reach that many people that fast? It's not possible. And so I think just the internet as a whole is required for a species to become mainstream more so now than it was before.
Do you think it takes more of a educational side on that species, or just the pure excitement of the guy who's passionate about it, just talking about how much he loves it to make people get into it?
I think I wish it was more of the educational side of things, but I don't think the educational side is what sells. I don't think that's what really gets people's attention. I think the advantage that our hobby is headed towards that I've seen a lot more lately is a lot of people, like, let's just pick a species, like red-eyed croc skinks.
Yep.
Incredible animals, right? Like, super cool. They look like a tiny dragon. You can't, and they're $250 captive bred. Like, you can't get any better than that. Like, they're awesome. They're so cool, but they're delicate and they're hard to keep. And so I think that if you see somebody online who's super passionate and like, check out my new pet croc skinks, and is posting videos of them and they're holding them weird all the time and they're not set up correctly, if you go to the comments on those videos, it is roast city, man. People are cutthroat on that stuff. And I think there's an element of that's almost like the education portion of the excited videos, right? It's like people do pay attention to that. And they're like, oh, these are delicate. Like, oh, that setup is incorrect. Like, how do I keep them correctly? And I think there's that, which obviously sucks for the guy who's the entertainer. But it's also like, if you can be entertaining and do right by the animals, you don't run into this problem. So,
yeah, it's funny. I had like the white PVC cages from Animal Plastics. I had like 5 stacks of 4-footers. I want to say they were all 5 high stacks. I just they were immaculate. I scrubbed them. I did everybody's liner over. I had hide boxes, nice big water dish. I had everything set up. And I took this wall picture.
mm-hmm.
So proud of that wall picture. Very first comment, "You're a piece of shit."
Yeah.
Last comment, man. Last time I was done. I was like, never again am I going to read anybody's comments about anything I do in this hobby. Like,
no, and I feel like you and I have actually had this discussion before. Like, to me, I give it all the same weight. Like, all the love comments and all the hate comments, they've all got the same weight to me. It's all just like, you know what? Like, appreciate your input, but like, you're not like, I'm not taking anything to heart. Like, and I appreciate all of the positive comments, obviously, but I'm not going to let that inflate my ego. And I'm also not going to let the shitty comments deflate my ego. You know, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I believe in it. And that's what I think drives it. So
I'm getting to this unique position in the hobby where I've been in it for so long that I do have some people that have come to me and just said like very kind things.
yeah.
Thank you for helping me through this problem. I might not have gone this far. Thank you for teaching me a little bit about breeding. Thank you for selling me my first animal. Thank you for replacing that animal when it dies. And like, it's a good feeling to be in the hobby. It took 20 years, but enough of my animals are out there. It's nice to get those conversations every once in a while.
Yeah, no, like, I mean, something you said to me at Tinley actually, like, really stuck with me. You know, you walked in, and I was getting set up and just kind of in the middle of things, and you shook my hand, and you were like, how's life? And I was like, oh, man, like, life's actually, it's great, man. It's good. And you said you're a hustler, and life's always good for a hustler. And I feel like that's you to a T as well. You know, it is. Like, if you take this seriously and you do right by your people and you hustle and you really work and you don't do like, you don't lie. You don't say like, oh, I'm working really hard and really you're not. If you're on it and you take this seriously, this business can work. But man, you better be ready to put it in because it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah. Another thing about you being a hustler, man, there's always something around you that keeps you entertained. Like, there's never a dull day. You're probably one of those guys that when the day's over, you're like, man, I wish I had a couple more hours.
Yeah, like I always joke, like I need an 8th day and 26 hours a day. Like it's never ending. There's never a time I don't have something to do. There's never a time I can't be finding some way to work on things. And like obsession is an understatement. Like this is my entire life. And you know, I juggle other things on top of it, but it consumes me, man. Like I really do love this wholeheartedly, and that hasn't changed since I was a kid. And like I think that's something that I'm super lucky to have. You know, it's just that drive to continue to do it no matter what. And it's had lots of times where I wanted to just be like, I'm hanging this up. Like this is too much. Like it's hard. Like, you know, you lose your ass on something, or you lose an animal that, you know, you can't replace, or, you know, you're sacrificing vacations and birthdays and everything else, you know, that goes into this. And there's days where you're like, you know what, maybe I should just sell all this shit and take that pile of cash and be done with it. But I couldn't, man. I'm too obsessed.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's really tough what you just said too, because like, you know, I remember the weekend of the Atlanta show that I usually do like $7,000-8,000 back in the day when I was on my own, which meant a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was the weekend of my grandpa's 80th birthday. Chose to go to the Reptile show because it was such a large amount of money. Now, luckily, my grandpa was Jewish, and he appreciated I was out there making money and skipping his birthday party. But like, I missed weddings, like, and it seems like all these special occasions that I wish I could have gone to just always fall in this weekend. That if I don't do this show, it could make or break my month. It can make or break my next 3 months. And it sucks to have to always make those decisions. But like sometimes in this hobby, to be successful, you're gonna let some people around you down.
Yeah, and you are hitting the nail on the head, man. And especially when you first start, you know, because I'm lucky now. I've kind of started to build a team of people that can take care of my animals and stuff, and, you know, help. Like if I'm going out of town, you know, they can watch the place for 4 or 5 days or a week, and I'm not sweating it anymore. But up until this year, man, like that hasn't been an option. Like I haven't had those people. I hadn't had that network or the staff to help me, and I'm finally getting that. And man, it's awesome to have it. But yeah, like you said, yeah, 80th birthdays, weddings, you know, date nights, anniversaries. You know, my wife has this picture that she absolutely just loves, but also holds over my head at every given turn. It's her birthday, and it's a picture of us at 3:00 in the morning, and I have a snake bag open, and my face is in the snake bag, and we were unboxing a Guyana shipment. And it's, you know, it's 3 a.m. on her birthday, and what's her loving husband doing? He's, you know, nuts deep in some shipment, working his ass off instead of doing something with her. But that's what it takes, man. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, but I will say this on the relationship part is women appreciate men that have a passion.
Sure.
You know, it sucks it was her birthday, but man, it's your passion. If it wasn't for your passion, she wouldn't like you as much as she did.
Yeah, no, and she's 100% supportive of this, man. She keeps me going. You know, and like I had a time about 2 years ago where I was really just down on myself. I had a couple things go really wrong, and like the business was honestly like pretty much failed. Like it was pretty much done, and I was just kind of like feeling sorry for myself a little bit, which I never do. I'm not that type of guy. And she looked me dead in the face and she goes, "I feel like you're only giving it like 40%." And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm at a show every weekend. I'm busting my ass. And she's like, 40%. And dude, she was right. Like, and sometimes like, having that partner and having somebody in this helps a lot too, whether it's a business partner or a spouse or significant other. But, she was right. And like, I put my boots back on and got back to work, and now it's doing well. So.
Yeah, I'm not ashamed to say that, I've had a lot of times in this industry, whether I had a small collection or a large collection, I've had a $20 bill to my name and nothing more.
Yep.
And, there's a real drive there. And I always took a lot of pride in telling somebody on a Friday about my $20 bill. And then on Monday, telling them about my $5,000 I have in the same spot I had that $20 bill. And that's really what this industry could be like. And I know you know that better than a lot of people.
Yep. No, I mean, you've been doing this a lot longer than me, and you've taught me when we were doing the same show circuit early on when I first started this. You were awesome to like kind of bounce ideas off and be like, man, like this sucks, and you're like, yeah, no, it does, and like you'll get through it. You just kind of were like, yeah, it's just part of it, and like having guys like that around really helps because you do feel alone in it sometimes, but I think that's any business.
No, that's the one bummer about this because anytime there's money involved in anything, it can become very competitive, but I don't really look at anybody as competition in my life. It's not like an asshole thing to say. It's not an arrogant thing to say, but like, I always say I want to be everyone's hype man. Talking to you, your comment you made, again, thank you. I really mean, it means a lot that you said that. But like, I want to see everyone succeed. People are not going to succeed on their own. They don't need my help. And I say that all the time. So like, we all need that little nudge sometimes. And I think sometimes people put my pussy on a pedestal a little higher than it needs to be. I mean, I've been in the hobby for a long time. I've done this and that. I think my resume is actually a lot smaller than other people's that should be a lot higher on the list than me. But, I love people at the smaller shows. I love seeing you at the show me's. I think we might have passed at the Repticons, but mostly the show me shows. I love that smaller crowd atmosphere. I like people that are like trying to find their way and like just needing that little nudge. Those are the guys I go out to dinner with. Like I can go and hang out with, so and so forth, whatever. But like, I love that early passion in the hobby for anybody because this is a gay thing to say, man, but it's so fucking pure. But it's also, man, like I said, we get a lot of bad advice along the way. And that is the truth. I've had some very bad advice along the way.
Yeah, and I think like like I said, you've obviously been doing this a lot longer than me, but I'm starting to get that, like people come up and kind of be like, I want to do this. Like, how do you do this? Like, can you what's the secret? Blah, blah, blah. And like, I think giving those people the attention and just being like, yeah, man, like you can do this. Like, it's tough, but like, I can do it. You can do it type thing. It changes not only like their day, but it changes their life, man. Like, if I didn't have the right people around me to be like, go for this, or, give it a shot, or try this, or, somebody reaches out and is like, hey, I have this contact, talk to this guy about this, that type of stuff. I mean, it really does change your life. And so I tell people all the time, like, it's that old saying, like your network is your net worth. So, get involved with a lot of people, but be smart, be careful. Don't get in with the wrong business partners. And that's one thing I stress too, is like, I'm a big believer in no business partners in this game. And I know a lot of people will argue with me, but the whole breeder loan, the whole like, oh, we're going to split everything 50-50. You buy the caging, I'll buy this. Like, I feel like that goes south so often. And I've done this all on my own, and it's always been really nice because the failures are mine and the successes are mine, and there's nobody else to blame. And that has been a very good thing for me, and at least in my experience with it.
No, I couldn't agree more. Breeding loans. It's when things start going wrong that breeding loans really fall apart, and it doesn't always have to be with the animals. It could also be with the person.
For sure.
I hate to say it, and I keep tabs on myself, but I have been in situations in the past where I've done breeding loans that I don't think that it lived up to the expectation it should have, and I put some of that blame on me. But I'll be straight with you. I got a little notepad. I got a couple numbers next to it. Still to this day, I think about it, and as I have moments where I do get ahead, I always try to go back to those moments and make it right, in my opinion. And it's not so much a guilt thing, but, some people have put trust in me over the years, and I just don't want to be that guy that lets them down. And there may have been moments, I'll be honest, like I mentioned financially, like and you do a breeding loan with somebody, you got all these babies in front of you, and it's time to sell them, and it's time to split that money down the middle, and oh fuck my electrical bill, like oh fuck this food bill, and I hate to say it, those have been situations I've been in, but I've always tried to come out on the other side of it. I've got a couple that are still in limbo, and depending on how this year goes, I'm gonna keep on chiseling away at what I think needs to be right. But breeding loans never work out, man. You're right. It's one way or another, even if there's good intentions on both sides, man, things just go wrong.
Yeah, no, and I mean, like early on, I did like some consignment animals, and for a close friend of mine, and like that went okay. But even that, like you start getting into it, and they want you to take more animals. You don't want to take as many animals. You want to stop doing it. They want to continue doing it. Like, you run into like these little, you butt heads with even your closest friends. And I really just think that the best way to do this business is to do it by yourself, and, like have your network around you for the knowledge and the support. But man, like getting everybody involved in it financially, it always seems to go sideways. I can't think of anybody that's like, oh yeah, no, like we partnered up and everything went great the whole time. You don't hear that very often.
It's a rarity, and I won't say that there's no good partners out there, but partnerships long term in this industry can be hard. Everybody wants the biggest piece of the pie possible, and I always say too, like one thing that's really tough about employees in the industry is when they realize they can do it on their own, they're not going to want to work for you anymore. So you escalate, or you bring people to a certain point in this hobby, I encourage them to go out on their own. I'm always happy when people want to do that, but man, that hurts when you put a few years into somebody.
Yeah, especially when they're going to take all of the knowledge that they gained on your dime and go to it, at the same caliber you are probably, or like without the mistakes. But I'm kind of like you in that respect. I have a hard time when people they're like, oh, this is my competitor or this is that. I think the pie is big enough for everybody to have their piece. And I think you can have as big a piece as you want, because I think the pie is always growing. And I think the more people that get into it, and the more better keepers and better breeders and better advertising and better everything that we produce as an industry, the more it expands. And I really think it's kind of unlimited. Like the hobby is very big. It's very strong, whether people like to say that or not. In my experience, it's been ever growing, and always, it's always been there. Like, I don't think it's going anywhere. Like, I don't think the exotic animal industry is going anywhere.
Well, the way I look at it is this. I remember that one moment when I learned about the hobby and how obsessed I got, and I'm just not convinced that there's not more of me out there. So, exactly. Yeah, the hobby there's no ceiling to how big this hobby can get.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I try to really focus on kids at shows too. I try to make sure that they're having an experience that they might not be able to get anywhere else. And I'm kind of notorious. Like, if a kid comes up to my table and he's 8 or she's 8 or whatever, and is like, this is a Guyana red-tail boa. They're true red tails. Their scientific name is, boa constrictor. They have this temperature range, and like they're just rambling on all those facts, which like we've all had that kid walk up to the table. I am the first one to pull their parents aside and be like, hey, like, are you comfortable with them having a snake? Like, would you be willing for me to just give them this animal? Like, if it's a good fit and they can take care of it adequately. And like, I try to do little things like that when I can, and like where I can, because that is, that's what gets everybody in, is somebody gives, shows them this experience with these animals, and it becomes a lifelong passion. And I think if everybody just does that a little bit more, and I know like you can't give away everything, obviously, like, it's still a business, but you can justify a $20 leopard gecko to a kid here and there. Like, I don't care who you are. And I think if you can put those animals in these kids' hands, like, that's your future, man. And like, I have customers that have been with me since before I was even an LLC. Like, people who have known me for 5 years that bought their first crested gecko from me, that this year are now producing king rats and breeding rhino rats. And like, like they're all in. And it's like, that doesn't happen without somebody giving them that first experience and it going well.
No, and I always tell people, you never really know what that species is going to be until you keep it. You may come in the industry on one thing, but you may change your mind. And, like you talk about like the youth, this little town I moved into, super teeny weeny. I'm not going to say the name because, I'm sure they're happy I'm here, but they might not be.
Yeah.
I'm set up right downtown, but the downtown is like a small town downtown. My building's open, the next building's open, the next 3 are empty. This one's open, kind of thing. So, a lot of businesses move out because of size, but on the other block there's a library, and I don't want to put a target on myself, but I really wanted to go in and be like, hey, if you guys want to do a little show and tell, I can come in, bring a couple lizards with, talk to the kids if you want that, free of charge. I know you can make money doing that kind of thing, but like I just want to do it to do it.
Right.
And I've even thought, like, with my local high school, getting with the science teachers, seeing if maybe in the fall the kids want to come in, ultrasound, follow an animal all the way through breeding, do the pundit square, see how things line up when they give birth, because why not? You don't know what kid in that classroom might decide he wants to do this for a living. If I knew about it earlier, because I've always been a passionate reptile guy, I would have started pursuing it earlier. But even though I always kept reptiles, it wasn't until I was almost 18 years old that I actually learned about breeding and selling and reptile shows. Like, for whatever reason, I never picked up Reptile magazine and looked in the back and saw those shows everywhere. I've just always been that guy out in the woods catching stuff. And that was always my reptile experiences growing up.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, man. I think it's good to do if you can get that community reach out. I really do. I think it's awesome, and it's how it grows. And the shows are the biggest way to get the public involved, I think, because especially at the smaller shows, you do get a lot of people that are like, we're just here to look. I didn't even know this existed. Like, this is crazy. And, they're looking at thousands of animals in a building that they've never even heard of. And, I don't know how that wouldn't spark anybody's interest, when you see something that's that, especially with a room full of people who are that passionate about it. It draws interest. It builds a little excitement around it. So I don't know, man. Like, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I'm very, very positive about our industry. Like, I really think that it's going the right way. I think husbandry is getting better. I think the customers are getting better. I think our ability to sell animals is getting better. Like, I'm hopeful, man. I think it's great.
I'm honestly glass half full, and I've always been glass half full. We talk. I try not to ever be negative about anything. I'll have a discussion if there's a conversation, but like, I've always been on the side of you'll fail if you fail. This industry will not fail.
Yeah.
The only thing that will ever put an end to this industry is regulation.
100%.
And I think, my entire time in the hobby, most of it is lived in the idea of the Lacey Act and everything else. Like, I got to experience that early on. Then I experienced it kind of fade away a little bit. Like, we've been lucky enough that nothing catastrophic has happened. Now, I do understand in the Southeast, there's been rules about tegus, some of the larger constrictors, so on and so forth. I'm not going to say for good reason, but the reality is, you're going to let a bunch of tegus go in the wild, and they're going to fucking thrive, expect there to be regulations.
Yeah, and actually, like, I'd like to get your thoughts on that, because I'm with you. Like, regulation is what would stop this, but also I feel that there are some appropriate regulations in place at times, and where I'm at in Michigan, the laws here are like incredibly lax, like almost, in my opinion, too lax. I mean, you don't have to have anything for permits. I mean, I have crocodiles and venomous animals and things like that, and there's no requirements whatsoever. And that, to me, I'm obviously like, I'd like to think of myself as a responsible keeper, and like I have a zoo that I partner with and stuff, and so like we're my crocodiles are out on display there and things like that. Like, I have the ability to adequately house and safely keep these animals, but I do think like it's kind of insane that someone can just do that. I mean, like, it seems very dangerous.
Well, Missouri is that way too.
Yeah.
Very lax on a lot of laws on a lot of animals. There's the Lolly Brother auction. It's north of Columbia. You can buy zebras. I think there's been giraffes there. I believe there's been lions and tigers there. Someone will show up with a crocodile. Like, there'll be sulcatas. Like, it's things that I wouldn't think you just roll in and put a little paddle in the air and take home with you kind of stuff. I guess your question for me is, do I think we need more regulation? Like, is there a balance there?
Yeah, I guess my question would be, what do you feel? Do you feel like there's an appropriate amount of regulation, or do you feel like it's something that we should be able to just do whatever and it should sort itself out?
Here's the thing. I love politics.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be Europe in any way whatsoever with any laws they do over there when it comes to any way of living, not even reptiles. Everyone says that, like, I think they want the United States to try to be Europe.
Yeah.
I do think that, it goes both ways, man. I do think some regulation in the hobby would help. I think self-policing would go a long way.
Definitely.
I always think it's people don't understand the damage they're doing in the hobby when they call someone else out publicly and they show abuse of animals publicly and it gets shared 10,000 times or however many times it does. Like, I understand why they might be doing it, but I also know most people are doing it just to see how many likes they get on their post about this animal abuse.
Yeah.
I think it's very dumb. I think I've known a lot of situations in the hobby where things were not going properly, and within your group of people went in and fixed the problem, and it didn't turn into a Facebook discussion, I guess is the way of putting it.
Right.
I think over time those things will add up, but I'll be honest. Do you have Samsung?
No.
Like your telephone? All right, well, it might be the same for you, but you swipe the screen right a couple times and you get to your Google feed, and it's just showing you stories, this, that, the other thing. I click on so many stories of animals being found in sewers, in yards, in bus stops, and whatever else that almost every day I can open up the Google and see a story in a small town somewhere in the United States of animal abuse.
Right.
Salcadas being left in the woods or I think in like Connecticut and dying. Like, this stuff is always out there. I don't know if we just fly under the radar because I don't think it's necessarily that, but I do think we've got away with a lot of shit, and I think it's because most people have a disconnect to reptiles. People don't mind a guy wearing a pair of snake skin boots, but they lose their mind if somebody has a fur scarf on. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, but I do think that, that like in Europe, caging requirement size based on the length of your animal. I don't think that's a bad thing, but I don't know what that does in the United States, the people that keep their ball pythons in a 50-40 series. Like, everybody.
Live feeding is outlawed in a lot of places there and things like that. And like, that is like, I mean, you have to do that at times,
Blows my mind. I mean, I'm sure they're all doing live feeding and not talking about it. With a boa constrictor, it's a 50-50 chance their first meal is frozen thawed. Second meal, it's like an 80% chance this thing's fucking frozen thawed. And usually by the third or fourth, I'm all frozen thawed. With a ball python, and again, that is the one species traded the most in the United States, you can go 4 years and not get that thing need a frozen thawed.
Right.
And at that point, I don't know if we run into if we start holding more animals back that are willing to take frozen thawed, is that going to pass on genetically? Is this like calming down the foxes in Russia that if you just keep on holding the calmest ones back and breeding them, eventually becomes inheritable?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think enough of ball pythons that I think those experiments should be done because I think they're simple-minded animals, and I think they live simplistically. And because of that, I don't think we should ever be testing their brain size shrinking over time because we think with the lack of stimulation in their cage, they got smaller brains now. And there's been papers on that. And I'm not discrediting it completely, but man, what a silly species to focus on for a paper. I'd rather focus on what a Eastern indigo in captivity or even a rat snake does in captivity with limited things in its cage. We talked about perches in our arboreals yesterday on the podcast. How many perches is proper for a emerald tree boa or a green tree python? Because for years we've seen many people with just one perch. Is it 2? Is it 3? Is it 5? Like, what needs to be the industry standards for every one of these animals? But we have to have a better understanding of all these animals to know what the industry standard is moving forward.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that too. And I think like we were talking about earlier, like there is a difference in species. Like, a ball python's a very simplistic animal. And like maybe if you only bred the ones that fed on frozen thawed, that would be inheritable. I mean, I know like I do a lot of dog training and police dogs and stuff like that. And I mean, we like the selective breeding on dogs, especially for police work, is, I mean, it's down to like we breed dogs to bite a certain way, to bark a certain way, like, to carry their nose a certain way when they track. And it all is inheritable in dogs, but it's a lot more prevalent in mammals. And me working in both fields, I work with a lot of exotic mammals too. So working with mammals and reptiles, it's not the same thing. And like we can have the reptile, intelligence argument as much as we want. But the reality is like they are very simple-minded creatures for the most part. There are different degrees of intelligence, but a ball python really doesn't need a whole lot. Like it's a very simple creature, and that's how they survive, right? Like they don't need anything more than that. So why put energy into developing that way? Like their species is doing fine.
No.
So yeah, I would be interested to see like you're saying, like, you know, the brain size shrinking and stuff like that. I could see that, like that makes sense, but I'm also kind of with you. Like, does it necessarily really matter to the industry? And I guess some people would argue yes, and some people would argue no. But it's an interesting thought, you know.
Well, I always like to compare the willingness of this industry to the willingness of other industries, and I always bring up the dog industry,
Yeah.
pugs, bulldogs. I mean, there's a lot of different dog breeds that maybe shouldn't be as mainstream as they are. Ones that you got to surgically remove the babies, and I'm not hating on it. These are beautiful animals, but there's a big acceptance for a thing like that in that community. Do you think, do you remember the desert ball python, how the females couldn't lay eggs?
Yeah. Yep.
If we only had a couple mutations look at in ball pythons, do you think the community would be willing to have to surgically remove the eggs for your female every year to make sure you're reproducing this ball python morph? Or would that be going too far? You know what I mean?
I think it'd be way too far for our industry. I don't think people would do it.
But if it's $2,500 a piece and there was only 2 colors, because why are people spending money on those dogs that have to be removed like that?
Right. Yeah. No. And I like. There's definitely that element of it. I think too. There's a different emotional attachment to dogs as opposed to reptiles, and I think that's just in the way that the animal interacts with you, right? Like your ball python doesn't love you like as much as some scale moms on Facebook want to tell you it does. Like it doesn't. It doesn't. It's not capable of that. Like it doesn't. It doesn't have the brain structure to be emotional. And so I think there's an element of that, and I think from my experience in the dog training world and stuff, like I'm a little bit more on like the flip side. Like I'm not super into like the Frenchies and pugs and things like that. I'm not going to say I disagree with it, but it's definitely not my thing. I'm not interested in that. I don't think it's good for the dogs. I'm much more into like the working dog side of things, dogs with jobs, tracking and hunting and police work and things like that. And so for me, I think I'm kind of on like the flip side of that. Like I would argue, like maybe French bulldogs shouldn't be a thing. Like if they can't breed on their own, like like maybe they're not. But I also get it. Like they make a fantastic pet. They're super cute. Like they get a lot of exposure, and I'm not going to hate on somebody for having one. It's just not my thing. And I think you'd see a lot of that with snakes too.
Yeah, I know a lot of those breeds go back years, but I'm really wondering when the day came where they're like, we're 2 females in and they can't pass their babies. Let's cut them open. Like,
Yeah, right.
It couldn't have been, it had to be gradual, right? Like it wasn't like abrupt, or maybe it was abrupt. I don't know, man.
Dude, some of those breeds too, like they can't even like copulate naturally. Like you have to artificially inseminate them because their hips are so bad they literally can't mount each other. Like the physics of a male mounting a female is impossible with some of these breeds now. And I'm just like, maybe we're going a little far.
Again, when you look at that, and our pet industry is so much younger than that industry, could there be that willingness in the hobby to go to those extents just because of the animal? Like a species that's hard to breed, maybe you got to do artificial insemination. Even some of the skink breeders in Australia have talked about that when their male misses, they're actually using a little syringe to pull some of that semen up, and they're putting it in the female, and they're successfully knocking that female up because of that. Should be using better words than knocked up, but I'm a simple-minded man.
We all get it.
Yeah, we all get it. We know it's up. I know my fan base. But no, and like you said, I always wonder what the industry is going to evolve into. And your comment earlier, and here's the thing, word for word, I've said the same thing. If you look at the industry today and don't think it's moving in the right direction, you're crazy. Everything about this industry from top to bottom, in my opinion, has drastically improved and continues to improve every year. And you mentioned Morph Market earlier. Fauna stagnant, beautiful, love fauna. You can still find some real gems on fauna if you go out there. King Snake, King Snake, very smart gentleman who owned that company. Could have probably got it a little further, but just kind of stopped. And when you look at Morph Market, the steps they've taken the last couple of years, the steps taken under John, like my favorite thing about John at the show was him walking around with that little notepad, asking breeders their opinion on the site. What do you want to see different? That felt good, having somebody ask me my opinion about something that was so detrimental to people making a living in the hobby.
Yeah, for sure. And I met John once, just like briefly at a show, but he was kind of like, he had Morph Market before I was really even like selling things in that capacity online. Because when I first started this business, I was doing all venomous, so everything was on King Snake. And then, as I started to transition to non-venomous, Darian got Morph Market kind of as I started going that way. So I've talked to Darian several times, and Darian kind of did the same thing. And I'm not trying to just like suck the Morph Market dick, but like the reality is like that
That's
is
good, buddy. It's okay.
Yeah, like we have to. Like it's good for us. It's good for our industry. It's good for breeders. It's good for sellers. Like these people who are trying to talk shit on it are nuts, and they're just not using it correctly, because the amount of sales I can make on Morph Market sitting on my couch compared to what I could do before on any online forum or any 10 forums combined is fucking insane. It's tenfold. And so I think like anybody who's hating on Morph Market either is running a really bad business or just isn't using it correctly, isn't using it in the way it needs to be. But
it might be an asshole thing to say, but they might be more hobbyists than running the business.
100%.
To take that one thing off the table that literally gives you the best fighting chance in the industry seems really silly. I do understand that there's always going to be politics in this industry, which I always say is very unfortunate. I'd rather talk snakes with you for hours than have to talk about something that really I don't really give a fuck about, to be straight.
Right, yeah.
But I do understand why those conversations need to happen. But like, I don't think people should fight a good thing, and Morph Market is a good thing. I see them advancing with the hobby, and I think they'll continue to advance in the hobby. I don't really see anything around us doing what they're doing. And I was very hesitant to get a Morph Market account because I was very happy on following Kingston.
Yeah.
But that day came where I realized, wow, look at the traffic the site's getting, look what it's doing. I mean, I remember when there was like only like one or two icons for like maybe like a ball python section, a boa section, and then boom, 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 they started like adding up. But like it was very simplistic in the beginning, but functionality was great, and they get a lot of eyes on it. And I love the dashboard feature.
Yeah.
I love the ratings that come with you. I don't mind the reviews. I love the reviews, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, I think the reviews are great because you're seeing, like, I mean, it's not, I don't even have a ton on there. I really started to use Morph Market this year, like heavily, because this year I haven't been doing as many shows. But yeah, like the reviews have been great. And you're talking about John walking around with his little notepad. You're like, what do you want to see on this? When Darian first took it over, he had made a post talking about like removing wild caught animals from Morph Market, and there was this huge, back and forth, and I got tagged in it 100 times. Like, talk to Josh, talk to Josh, talk to Josh, talk to Josh. And I didn't say anything. I was just like, like Darian's running his own business, and like he bought Morph Market. He can do whatever he wants. Like, obviously I would love to use that platform, but like if he's not going to allow wild caught animals, then like that's his decision. Like I'm not going to sit here and try to fight with him about it. But all of a sudden my phone rings and it's Darian, and he's like, hey man, he's like, explain this to me. What's going on here? Like you keep getting tagged in this. Like what are you doing? And he spends a half hour with me on the phone, and we talk, and he ends up coming up with like the wild caught tag. And then, even about a month ago, he called me and he's like, I'm calling 1,000 sellers on Morph Market, and just asking like their opinion and their advice. And I think people like that, and it's something that I think everybody could learn from. And I'm sure you talk to your customers too. Like, what do you guys want to see? Type thing. What is beneficial to you guys? And people who run their sites or their companies like that tend to do well. And I think that's what you're seeing in Morph Market is he's appealing to sellers, which in turn is creating a lot more customers because the sellers are able to do what they want to do and are able to like get the listings the way they want them.
No, 100%. And here's the thing. Honesty in animal sales, I think, is important. I can think of a number of times over the years with the lack of honesty, I found myself in bad situations because the animals I've got in. And I don't think putting that tag on there is a bad thing because you got tagged for a reason. And, we kind of started this discussion like, importers are a dirty term, or like thought to be like dirty people in the hobby. In some cases, there is some truth there. But You're one of those guys that puts the effort in, puts the time in, puts thought into it, doesn't put garbage out because it came in. Like, your name is on this animal no matter what. Even if you didn't produce it, you're putting your name on there. Yeah. So that's the reputation you created for yourself, and that's a good thing, man. Like I said, me hitting you up wasn't a fluke. Me talking to you at the shows wasn't a fluke. I mean, I love your energy, man. I think you're a good guy. I like the passion, and I'm not always the best judgment of character, but, you're definitely, like I said, one of those guys that have always stood out to me at the shows, and I've always really loved your table.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, man.
No, of course. But, back again, and we'll wrap up with the Morph Market thing. I'm not going to keep you. I know you got that tattoo today, but nothing they're doing, in my opinion, is wrong, but it doesn't mean it won't be looked at in the wrong way in people's eyes. Um, I think there's ways of utilizing that website to run a business, and I do think it'd be very. If I can use Morph Market tomorrow, I don't even know how I'd run my business.
I'm in
Like,
the same boat. Like, I don't know where we go. So,
and I could go back to the show grind. I love the show grind, but emails are easier. Packing, or I understand some people are afraid of shipping animals. They think of how much can go wrong. Things can go wrong, but I'll be honest, it is a rarity. I think in the last decade, maybe one snake that I shipped died during shipping, and I think it was something that got held up for a couple days. Not sure. I think it was of course pretty hot out, and it happened.
well, like
Uh,
how many snakes are you shipping a week, or how many animals are you shipping a week?
well, my numbers are down right now
Mhm.
because I just did a huge downsize. Like I went from a giant warehouse and a partner to a little warehouse and me. So I ordered 200 shipping boxes a few months ago, and I used them all.
Yeah, so
Um,
you're moving some animals though. Like, think about that. Like 200 boxes in a few months. Like, that's
yeah,
not nothing. To have one issue with FedEx, man, those numbers. That's
no,
minuscule
it's
numbers.
nothing. No, in the big picture of things, I mean, I have probably shipped out 10,000 plus things in the past decade, and I've not had issues. I've had shipments where I've put 150 animals in the shipment. Everybody shows up okay, no problems whatsoever. Like I said, I think there's certain details that people overlook when looking at how to package an animal in a box. Like I look at the weather on the way, I look at the stopping point, and I think, does the heat pack need to be on the side? Does it need to be above them? Does it need to be beneath them with a little extra bedding on top so that heat is rising on the whole time? Like I put a lot of thought into it, and I
As
think
you
because
should,
I'm
yeah.
very successful with shipping, I don't just tape the heat pack to the top of the box and send it out. How many holes I put in the box because of the temperatures, because of the heat pack. Like, there's a lot of little details that would be good to know. And I know a lot of people, the thing with like, we're talking about like the online thing and like social media and everything like that. What hasn't been already explained in a video? Like, what could you go out there and explain to somebody that maybe isn't already information out there? And I think that's the tough thing for me when I look at the social media thing. Like, I don't want to teach someone how to breed a ball python. People know how to breed a ball python. I'm not going
Yeah.
to do an ultrasound video. People have seen an ultrasound video, but like, what is the industry lacking when it comes to keeping and breeding animals that we need that information out there? I think shipping is a big part of that. And even me talking about body language with skinks, you talking about moving your cages around. Now that's information, in my opinion, needs to go out there because I don't think that's really being put out there right now.
Yeah, and I think the only place you're getting that information right now is in podcasts, and like the podcasts have definitely grown a bit, in the reptile hobby. But there's nobody. I mean, there's some bigger ones, but like I don't feel like it's reaching the masses like a video does, like a YouTube video does, right? And so I think that there is. It's almost like me, because I've thought about this, like doing almost like clips, like a 5 minute thing. Me and you sit down, you tell me all about like breeding your skinks and like the behaviors you look at, and then like we clip in a video of like one of those females looking at you and wagging its tail, and you being like, "Look, like this is what I'm looking for right here." I think shorter form content that people can consume because their attention spans are so short. I think that might be a good avenue. And the other thing too, like I did one not too long ago on like the waxy monkey frogs that came in that I got in. Um, I've been considering doing like a little series, I guess you could say, of just like little bullshit that we do here with the animals that helps. Like right now, like I'm about to post one. I have a peach throat monitor that came in with an injury on its leg, and like the injury had like a bunch of bark and bedding and stuff like stuck in it from when she had came in. And so like I took a video of like me and Danielle cleaning that out and like the treatment we put on it and like how we're setting her up. And I think doing things like that could still be beneficial. But I agree with you. Like, I mean, if I Google how to breed a ball python, there's 4,000 videos on it.
Yeah, there's some stuff, and I understand, we all want to, and like I said, I just don't know how many how-to videos we can keep doing for simple things. And I don't mean to be rude when I say that, but like, I love the idea of doing more on social media. And, when you talk about how, the reality is attention spans, people click on things if it's 5 minutes or less, 10 minutes or less. Sometimes when podcasts exceed 2 hours, that's too much.
Mm-hmm.
I do get the complaint sometimes that sometimes these are too long. But I always say sit down in 2 sessions, buddy. You don't have to listen to me talk for 3 hours, but
Yeah,
all right,
right.
3 hours. I'm talking for 3 hours. But like if I'm gonna watch a podcast that's a long format, I love that small clip. Like if I'm gonna watch a Joe Rogan podcast, I'll watch a clip, and if I think that 5-minute conversation was interesting, I'll give that 3 hours a shot. So for me, with what you're saying with podcasting, I always like to try to pick out that one moment in the podcast, the clip, because then I think that one moment will entice somebody to listen to the full 2 hours.
Yeah, I agree because I do the same thing. Like when I like you scroll across a clip and you're like, oh, that was interesting. Like, who is that person? And then you're all of a sudden you're on the spiral and you're listening to the whole thing. So
Yeah,
I'm with you.
a bunch of guys like that, man. I don't even know what I'm really looking for in information anymore. Like, I feel like I need to consume myself with some new information. I'm obsessed over something that's really useless for my life for a long time in YouTube, in those videos. I need to go a new direction. I need a fresh algorithm going into the year. Like, I heard you could reset your algorithm on Instagram, where it just
really?
I heard they have a new feature on there. You could reset it and just completely start over. Like anything you click on moving forward is going to be what you see. So, not that I use Instagram, but I would probably reset a couple things. Facebook sucks now, man. Like, I don't know what I did to my algorithm, but like, I understand I click on a lot of midget wrestling and some other stuff, but like, man, I used to have a lot more animal stuff on my feed. Man, my feed sucks now. Like I almost want to like delete it and start over. I've really not enjoyed Facebook for a while now.
Yeah, my Facebook has just become essentially like a business platform, which is funny because I actually hate the business platform on Facebook. Like if you make a business page, I think their business page for like platform, the messaging system on there and everything, it's trash in my opinion. But like your personal page, I think runs very smoothly and easily. So like mine is just animal stuff. I don't think there's anything else. And like honestly, if I catch somebody posting like too much personal shit on there and not enough animals, I'm like, you're out. So that's how I keep it.
It's down at 5,000 friends right now, right?
What's that?
On Facebook, you're maxed out on friends. So you hit that 5,000 limit, right?
Yeah, I've been there for a while, but I did make it where you can like follow the page where you'll still see the posts.
Okay.
And so like that's helped too. And like I don't know how many followers are on there. Like, that word's always weird to me too. Like the word follower is crazy, but
Yeah, I have seen that. I've noticed that in the description. I think my only concern is like 1 or 2 videos I post a year may have my butt or maybe something inappropriate in it. And maybe I don't need more than 5,000 people looking at that.
I disagree completely. That's actually the highlight of your page for me is when like you've got fireworks in your underwear and you're on a sled somewhere. I'm like, this guy is my fucking hero of the week.
And I appreciate that because honestly, those are some of my favorite times of the year. And I will say I love the build up now because I usually have people like blowing me up like the 24 hours ahead of time. Like, a lot of times I think of this idea like the day before 4th of July and I do it. It's very rare that I like build up for a whole year. It's literally like putting some things together last minute. Like the last year one where I got hit in the nuts with the water balloon. I literally brought my neighbor and his kids over and I was all like, someone's got to hit me in the nuts. I was like, that's the job you got to do. It. One of you guys got to hit me in the nuts, and it worked out perfectly. Without the nut shot, I don't even know if that video is a good video this past year. But no, I do enjoy doing that kind of stuff. I like skits. Yeah. I've always been a skit guy. I got a good buddy in Buffalo I grew up with that always wanted to do skits together. Like, I do enjoy that kind of stuff. And I've always said that I want to create something for the hobby that is entertainment for the hobby that is only relatable to people in the hobby, like an inside joke kind of thing. Like, you're not going to get it if you watch outside. And I know that limits my demographic, but I don't really give a shit about anything outside of this community. So entertaining people outside of the community doesn't really matter to me.
Right.
But all right, how about this? Because we just made it all about me at the end there. I'm going to try to think of a way to wrap this up. Because like I said, do you have a story that you love telling, like that one story about that one incident, that one moment that like you tend to tell maybe way too much? Like the wife looks at you like, oh, fuck, he's telling the story again. Got any of those stories?
I think my issue is I've been doing animals because like outside of reptiles, like I've been working with mammals for almost about 10 years now. I think my issue is I just have too many fucking stories. And so like my wife's just exasperated permanently at this point. Like every time I open my mouth, she's like, oh, here he goes again. Some crazy animal story,
I'm the same way. I try to talk very quietly and I'm repeating the story for the 9,000th time.
Yeah.
Well, like this, what do you think will be the next region that you may expand your reach into about bringing a species in that you've been interested in for a while?
I really, really, really want to do Madagascar.
Yeah.
like, I know it's been done. Like, I know people are arguing, but like, honestly, in my opinion, and this might sound shitty, but like, nobody's done it right. I really don't think anybody's really brought in Madagascar and like done it justice, because you see just like the quality, especially with the Europlatus, man, the quality of animals that get sent to customers is just straight up shit. Like, these people, like the end customer is getting a dehydrated, sick gecko that's gonna live 2 weeks in a lot of cases. Not saying all the time, I'm not saying everybody, but I just think that genus is one of the most amazing genuses on Earth, and I think that if somebody, you're seeing a lot more people start to work with them and breed them, but the reality is I don't think there's enough of them in the U.S. to really take a hold. And I think if someone can get a solid contact and bring in a good number of them and provide healthy animals and start breeding their own and provide healthy animals to the right people, I think that genus could actually take hold, and it could kind of fill like a similar niche to like dart frogs did, where everybody got really into dart frogs because like we figured out how to keep them and we could set them up in the tank. You know, you had a bioactive kit that you could order, and I think that could happen with Europlatus, because I have not met a person on Earth that I can't walk into my facility and point to a big Fimbriatus, one of the giant leaf tails, and be like, look at that fucking thing, and they're not like, what is it? That thing's an alien, and they're enthralled by it. I've yet to find that person, and I think that to me is exciting. And anything from the little Satanics all the way up to the Giganteus, like I think that genus is really special, and I don't think there's enough of them in the hobby to sustain.
No, I've always liked the I don't know, you said it, I'm gonna say it wrong, the Satanics.
Yeah.
I've always loved them. I love the eye color. I look the complete look of the animal, and when you talk about this industry being a bioactive industry right now, and like being a drive there, man, what a beautiful species to keep in a bioactive.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that picture that went viral, it's fake, but it's a Satanic with like dragon wings attached to it.
Yeah.
You ever seen that? And that went all over the internet, and everybody's like, "This is so crazy. I wish it was real." And I was like, "If you erase the wings, it's a real fucking picture. Like, that thing is real. Like, there is a real tiny dragon. It just doesn't have wings, you know." But yeah, so I think that's probably where I want to expand to next. I want to go to Madagascar and find a farm and do it right for Madagascar. So.
Yeah. Well, last question. Will you forever be in Michigan, or have you ever thought about maybe going somewhere a little warmer to do what you're doing?
No, I'm leaving. I won't be here forever.
Okay.
We got that plan in motion, expanding, doing some real estate stuff up here now too, and we just moved and got a rental house going. But yeah, I'm going south, man. Probably Texas. I think that's where I'm supposed to be. So.
I think Texas is a great state, man. I don't know too many people that don't love Texas. I love going down there. The food's good. The culture's good.
Yeah.
Well, you got a city you like down there?
No, actually, I haven't spent a lot of time there, honestly. Like, not nearly as much as I would have liked to, but I just feel like that's the last great frontier down there, and I think that's where I want to end up, because I want that big ranch with my crocodiles outside and all that. And I think that's where we'll end up permanently at some point, but that's a few years out. I'll be in Michigan for a little while longer.
Well, that's fair, man. Well, man, if you want to wrap it up by letting people know where to follow you, things you're doing, and where to keep an eye out for you, upcoming shows, anything you like, man.
Yeah, so I mean, just my Facebook, my name, Josh Alder, last name's Alder, and then my Morph Market, my company is The Exotic Empire. That's the best place to keep up with the animal stuff. I've been pretty good about keeping the Morph Market updated, and that's kind of the Facebook and that are what I spend the most time on. So if you want to find me there, and I really appreciate you having me on, man. I'm glad we got to do it.
No, it really sucks when you only do this a couple times a month. You're a guy that I've wanted to do this with for a long time. It took me not having somebody and you saying yes last minute, and I'm glad it worked out that way. Made a great conversation, but I've wanted to have this conversation with you for a long time. I'm glad it lined up the way it did. I'm glad everyone else failed me that I was able to make time for you. How about that?
Well, yeah, I'll take it where I can get it. So.
Me too, buddy. Me too. But no, honestly, I appreciate you, man. I had a great time having this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, brother.
All right. Well, guys, honestly, another good week. This was nice. This is the first time I've had a one-on-one session in a long time. I keep bringing everybody to do these with me. It felt good. I might be cutting off all my friends after this one, but no, you guys know the rules, guys. Like and subscribe. Appreciate everybody who's willing to come out and watch this every week. And Josh, thank you, buddy. Love the shit out of you, bud. That was a good time.
Yeah, thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
Keep grinding, buddy. Keep grinding.
You too, bro.
All right, later.